There are nights when a misread message can change everything. That night, Elena was alone. Her phone battery was dying. Her hands were shaking. And the only person who took her plea for help, not her best friend, not the police, was the man half Philadelphia feared mentioning by name. This is the story of that rainy night, and I guarantee you, you won't guess what happens next. If you enjoy dark, broken, but fiery stories, hit like now. Leave a comment with the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has progressed. And don't turn off the screen, because this is only part 1. The alarm broke at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in November. Elena Mercer knew the exact time because she had been staring at the microwave clock when it happened. The green digits reading 11:47, the hum of the appliance absurdly normal against the sound that came next. A crack, clean and sharp and final, like a dry branch snapping underfoot in winter. Her brain refused to process it for a full 2 seconds. Then the pain arrived. It didn't build. It detonated. She went down hard onto the marble floor of the kitchen, her knees hitting first, then her hip, her shoulder catching the corner of the kitchen island on the way down. The impact rattled her teeth. The scream that came out of her throat wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound you make when pain exceeds language. A high, airless thing, like steam escaping through a crack. She pressed her forehead against the cold marble and tried to breathe. Victor Hale stood over her. He was still breathing hard. His dress shirt was untucked on one side, the expensive white cotton pulling loose from his charcoal slacks. He'd been home from the dinner client meeting for 40 minutes. It had taken him 33 of those minutes to get here, to this precise outcome, to Elena on the floor and himself standing over her with blood smeared thin across 2 knuckles on his right hand. Not a lot of blood, just enough to catch the light. "You made me do that," he said. His voice had already come back down from the edge. That was the thing about Victor, the speed of his recovery, how fast he could move from detonation back to something that almost sounded like calm. She'd watched him do it a dozen times before, 100. She'd made the mistake of thinking each time was the last time. "Do you understand me now?" Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. Her arm was bent wrong, pressed against her ribs, and every shallow breath she pulled in sent white fire from her elbow up to her shoulder socket. She could feel her heartbeat in the bone. She focused on the grout lines in the marble floor, gray and precise and indifferent. She focused on those because if she looked up at Victor right now, she wasn't sure what would happen inside her chest. Victor paced. That was what he did afterward, paced the apartment like an animal returning to its territory, reasserting ownership of the space. He moved to the liquor cabinet in the living room and poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass with the casualness of a man pouring a drink after a long day at work. He swirled it. He didn't look at her again immediately. Outside, rain hammered Philadelphia. It had been raining since mid-afternoon, the kind of November rain that came in sideways and turned the streets below the penthouse into rivers of reflected light. 32 floors up, the world outside was nothing but darkness and water and the smear of distant headlights. Elena had always loved the view when she first moved in. 18 months ago, she had stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows and thought she was the luckiest woman alive. She lay on the kitchen floor now and stared at the grout lines and tried not to pass out. Victor came back eventually. He stopped near her but didn't crouch down. He looked at her the way you look at something you've broken by accident. Not with remorse exactly, but with a kind of irritated assessment. "Get up," he said. She tried. The attempt moved her arm and the pain turned the room gray at the edges. "I can't," she whispered. Something crossed his face. Not guilt. Closer to annoyance, the expression of a man whose evening had been complicated by circumstances outside his control. He grabbed his coat from the hook near the door, the long black cashmere one, the one that cost $4,000, and shrugged it on. "You stay right there," he said, his voice dropping to something cold and quiet. "And think very carefully about how far you pushed me tonight." He picked up his keys. "Don't call anyone," he added. "Not a request." "I mean it, Elena." The deadbolt engaged with a sound like a gunshot. Then silence. Not complete silence. There was still the rain, still the faint bass pulse from the club 3 buildings over, still the mechanical hum of a luxury apartment at midnight, doing its job of being expensive and comfortable and utterly indifferent to human suffering. But the particular silence of Victor's absence settled over the penthouse like a held breath. Elena waited. 1 minute. 2. She listened for the elevator doors down the hall, the distant mechanical sound of descent. Then she moved. Getting across the floor to the living room couch was not a graceful process. She used her right arm and her knees, dragging herself across the marble in slow increments, stopping twice when the movement jostled her left arm and the pain clamped down hard enough to make her vision tunnel. By the time she reached the couch, she was soaked through with cold sweat. Her hair had come loose and was hanging in her face. She didn't bother fixing it. Her phone. She'd heard it hit the floor during the fight, during the part of the fight she no longer wanted to reconstruct in her head, and it had slid under the couch. She pressed her cheek against the hardwood of the living room floor, squinting into the darkness beneath the furniture. A glint of cracked glass. She reached under with her right hand, fingers searching, finding the phone's edge, dragging it out. The screen was spiderwebbed from corner to corner. The battery icon in the top corner read 2%. 2%. Elena sat up against the base of the couch and unlocked the phone with her thumb, the cracked glass biting lightly at her skin. Her hands were shaking badly, not just from pain, though the pain was significant, a constant screaming presence from elbow to shoulder, but from the adrenaline crash that comes after the kind of fear that rewires your nervous system. The kind of fear that doesn't let go even after the immediate danger leaves the room. She needed Mia. Mia Vasquez, who had been her best friend since sophomore year of college, who still had a key to Elena's old apartment in South Philly that Elena had never asked back, who answered her phone at 2 a.m. without complaint, who had told Elena 18 months ago when she first started seeing Victor that something about him made the back of Mia's neck cold. Elena had laughed it off. She had kissed Victor on the cheek and introduced him to Mia at a rooftop dinner and told herself that Mia was overprotective. She wasn't overprotective. Elena navigated to her messages with a shaking thumb. The screen kept flickering from the damage. Mia's name sat near the top of the list. Elena tapped it, opened the message thread, and started typing. Her hands were shaking too badly for precision. She hit wrong letters and autocorrect filled in guesses. And she didn't have time to fix every mistake because the battery was dying and Victor could come back, and every second she spent fumbling with the screen was a second she didn't have. She typed what she needed to say. The essential facts. Her location. A plea stripped down to its bare bones. She hit send. The screen went black immediately. Not the fade-to-sleep black of low battery conservation. The hard, instant black of 0%. The phone shutting down mid-process. The battery surrendering completely in the same moment as the message departed. Elena stared at the dead screen for several seconds. Then she pressed it against her chest and leaned her head back against the couch cushion and closed her eyes. She had gotten the message out. That was what mattered. Mia would come. Mia always came. She focused on breathing through the pain and waiting. What she did not know, could not know, with a dead phone pressed to her chest in a dark apartment, was that the message had not reached Mia Vasquez. In the last 3 weeks, Mia had been given a new number after switching carriers. Elena had meant to update the contact. She'd kept forgetting. The phone number saved in her contact list under Mia's name was 9 months out of date. The text had landed somewhere else entirely. The private phone was a matte black device that Dante Salvatore kept separate from everything else. Different carrier, different number, registered to a name that existed only on paper and corresponded to no living person. Fewer than 8 people in the world had that number. His attorney, his doctor, 2 members of his inner circle, his sister in Boca Raton, though she rarely used it. The rest were business associates of the particular kind of business that didn't have a Chamber of Commerce listing. The phone almost never received texts. When it buzzed at 11:53 p.m. on that Thursday in November, Dante was in the back booth of Club Serafino, the private venue that occupied 3 subterranean floors beneath what the city's tax records still listed as a defunct opera house in the Rittenhouse Square district. The place had been closed to the public for 15 years. The chandeliers still worked. The bar was fully stocked. The acoustics were excellent, which meant the low pulse of music from the lower level reached the upper lounge at just the right frequency, present enough to fill the silence, quiet enough to think. He was thinking. He'd been doing a lot of thinking lately, which was not unusual, but the particular quality of his thoughts tonight had a harder edge than normal. There were decisions coming that couldn't be delayed much longer, the kind that moved pieces on a board and couldn't be unmoved. He sat with a glass of sparkling water. He rarely drank during working hours, and working hours were flexible in his line, and turned a pen between his fingers without writing anything. Luca Moretti sat across from him reviewing something on a tablet, occasionally murmuring observations that Dante acknowledged with minimal responses. Luca had been his right hand for 11 years. He'd learned to read the calibration of Dante's silences. He didn't push. The phone buzzed. Dante glanced down at the screen out of habit. Unknown contact. That alone was unusual. Everyone who had this number was stored. He read the message once. Victor broke my arm. Please help me. Apartment 12, C. Hurry. He read it again. The pen stopped moving between his fingers. There was a moment, 2, 3 seconds, where the rest of the room continued to exist, and Dante simply sat very still inside it, reading the message a third time. The music pulsed below. Luca turned a page on the tablet. The chandelier overhead threw its particular honey yellow light across the velvet upholstery of the booth. Dante set the pen down. Luca. Something in the single word made Luca look up immediately. 12 years of working for Dante Salvatore had calibrated him to certain frequencies. That particular tone, flat, controlled, with something underneath it that wasn't anger exactly, but was related to anger the way thunder is related to lightning, that tone meant stop what you're doing. He stopped what he was doing. Dante turned the phone screen to face him across the table. Luca read the message. His expression shifted. Wrong number? Maybe, Dante said. I need to know who sent it. Luca was already pulling up a different application on the tablet. He was efficient at this. He had resources for this specifically, a network of connections and telecom infrastructure that had taken years and considerable expense to cultivate, and that proved useful approximately 6 times per year in ways that no legitimate business could replicate. He had a number in under 2 minutes. Registered to Elena Mercer, he said. 26 years old. Address comes back to Riverside Tower, 32nd Street. He paused. 32nd floor. What's in 12C at Riverside Tower? More typing. A pause longer this time. 1 Victor Hale. 34. Investment portfolio management, which mostly means he manages other rich people's money and takes a percentage. Another pause. His name's come up in our circles before. Not directly. Through the Pellegrino family, peripherally. He runs money for people who need money run. Dante stood up. He did it with the economy of motion that characterized most of what he did. No wasted movement, no dramatic scraping of chair legs. He simply was seated and then was standing, and the shift in his posture in the room carried a specific gravity that made the 2 men near the entrance straighten slightly without having been told to. Get the car, he said, and call Marco and the DeLuca brothers. Luca was already moving. Dante. He said it carefully, the way you'd say the name of someone standing too close to an edge. It could be a wrong number, could be nothing. Dante picked up the phone and slid it into his inside coat pocket. Could be, he agreed. He buttoned his coat. Get the car anyway. The convoy moved through Philadelphia like it owned the wet streets, which in several significant financial and practical senses it did. 3 black SUVs, windows dark, cutting through red lights with the calm assurance of vehicles that knew they would not be pulled over. Dante sat in the back of the middle vehicle and watched the city pass outside the rain-blurred window. Old neighborhoods giving way to new money. Brick row houses replaced by glass towers. The city rebuilding itself constantly, covering its old bones with new skin. He thought about his mother. He didn't often let himself do that. It was a deliberate discipline. The same way an old injury teaches you to favor a different limb. You learn to root around the places that don't hold weight anymore. But the message on the phone had cracked something open in the back of his skull, and the memory came through the crack the way cold air comes through a gap in a wall. His mother's name had been Rosa. She had been 31 years old when his father broke her jaw on a Tuesday evening in a 4-room apartment in Brownsville, Brooklyn, while Dante stood in the hallway outside the closed kitchen door, 8 years old, listening. He remembered the sound. He had never found a way to unremember it. Certain sounds carved themselves into the architecture of you, became load-bearing walls, and you built everything that came after on top of them, whether you chose to or not. He watched the rain streak the window. He thought about the message. Victor broke my arm. 6 words. The stripped-down syntax of someone in too much pain or too much fear for anything extra. The please. The hurry. He'd received a lot of communications in his life, detailed, elaborate, eloquent communications, and very few of them had landed with that kind of weight. There was no performance in it, no hedge. Someone had typed that message in the dark with shaking hands because there was nothing left but those 6 words, and the hope that someone on the other end would hear them. He had heard them. The convoy stopped in front of Riverside Tower at 12:11 a.m. The building was exactly what its address advertised: glass and steel, and the quiet ostentation of New Philadelphia money, a lobby with a security desk and a doorman and a camera in every corner. The doorman was a heavy-set man in his 50s who took one look at 4 men in black coats coming through the revolving door with the weather-beaten calm of people who went where they chose and registered it correctly as a situation that exceeded his pay grade. He reached for the phone at the security desk. Luca put a hand on the counter before he could lift the receiver. "Apartment 12C," Luca said quietly. "We know the way." The doorman looked at Luca's hand on the counter, looked at the other 3 men, looked at Dante, who hadn't broken stride and was already crossing the lobby toward the elevators with the quality of focus that made rooms part around him like water. The doorman put the phone down. The elevator was mirrored on 3 sides. Dante watched his own reflection rising floor by floor. The dark coat, the lines of his face, the particular expression he wore when something inside him had made up its mind and the rest of him was catching up. He looked like what he was. He had made a certain peace with that a long time ago. 32nd floor. The doors opened onto a carpeted hallway with recessed lighting and the particular hushed quality of expensive buildings at midnight. 2 directions. Dante turned right without hesitation. He heard Victor before he reached the door. The sound was muffled by the apartment wall and the thick carpet of the hallway, but it was identifiable, a male voice, the particular sharpness of someone resuming an argument after an interruption. Victor had come back. Dante processed this information with the same flat calm he processed most information and kept walking. He stopped in front of 12C. From inside Victor's voice, a crack of what might have been something hitting furniture, a sharp female intake of breath. Dante looked at Marco. The door handle was beside the point. Marco hit the door with his shoulder at the precise angle and force of someone who had done this professionally, and the door came off its hinges on the frame side with a sound like the apartment itself had given up. Dante stepped through. Victor was standing in the center of the living room, coat still on, keys still in his hand. He had apparently just arrived back minutes before them. He spun around at the sound of the door. His face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: shock, confusion, an automatic reach for authority. Elena was against the far wall. She had pulled herself up onto the couch at some point and then apparently tried to get up when she heard him come back because she was half standing, half crouched against the couch arm, with her left arm held against her body at an angle that was wrong, deeply wrong, the wrongness of it visible from across the room. Her face was streaked. Her hair was loose and tangled. She was wearing a gray sweater and dark slacks, and the gray sweater had a small dark stain on the shoulder that Dante didn't look at twice, because looking at it twice would cost him something he needed to keep. Her eyes found him across the wrecked doorframe and the ruined room and the rain-dark city behind her. She stared. He crossed the room in 8 steps, and none of them were fast. They were deliberate, measured, the walk of someone who had already decided every subsequent thing. And Victor, who had been winding himself up to say something, seemed to sense in those 8 steps that the normal categories of his life did not apply to this moment. "Did he do that to you?" Dante asked. His voice came out quiet. Not soft. Quiet. "There's a difference. Soft is gentle. Quiet is controlled." She nodded once. Victor laughed. It was a nervous laugh, the social reflex of someone whose usual tools had stopped working and who was cycling through options. "Listen, man," he said, "whatever you think this is between me and my girlfriend, a private matter. I don't know who you are or how you got in here, but you need to step back and—" Dante turned. He had been looking at Elena when Victor started talking, and he turned from her to Victor the way a searchlight turns, with mechanical patience and no particular hurry. He looked at Victor for the first time with his full attention, the way you examine something you intend to break and want to break correctly. Victor's laugh drained out of his face. He got one more sentence out. "Do you even know who I am?" Dante said, "Yes." Then he crossed the room. The punch landed with a sound like a door slamming. Victor went over the dining table in a scatter of glass and silverware and a candle holder that had probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. And he hit the floor on the far side and lay there for a moment, making the particular sounds of a person whose nervous system is attempting to reboot. He got up. That was the thing. He got up, which told Dante something about Victor Hale's character. The specific flavor of his pride. The kind that made you keep fighting even after you understood you were losing, not from courage, but from the inability to accept the repositioning of yourself in the room's hierarchy. Victor had a kind of pride that needed to be in charge of every room it entered, and having that taken from him by a stranger was intolerable enough to override the rational part of his brain that should have told him to stay down. He swung. Dante caught the wrist. He did it with the flat automaticity of someone catching a ball thrown predictably, and the motion that followed was brief and clinical and ended with a sound that Victor had recently made Elena listen to in reverse, the same architecture of sound, the same structural failure. Victor's voice reached a register it had probably not reached since childhood. Luca and Marco kept him from falling, not out of kindness, to keep him vertical while Dante stepped close enough to speak without raising his voice. "You broke her arm," Dante said. Victor was crying. The tears came out messy and without dignity, which was appropriate. "So now," Dante continued, "you have some understanding of what that word means. Helpless." He tilted his head slightly. "Say it." Victor said nothing. Marco adjusted his grip on Victor's collar. Victor said the word. Dante held his gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he stepped back and adjusted his right cuff, which had come slightly undone, and turned away from Victor with the finality of someone closing a drawer. He walked back to Elena. She hadn't moved from the couch arm. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Shock, yes, and pain, and something underneath both of those that was more complex. He'd seen that expression before. The particular look of someone whose model of how the world works has been revised without warning. He shrugged off his coat. It was an automatic gesture, and he did it without thinking, moving behind her and settling the coat around her shoulders with a care that was at odds with everything that had just happened in the room. The coat was heavy and warm and slightly damp from the rain, and it was the best thing available. She flinched slightly when the fabric touched her left shoulder. "Sorry," he said quietly. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. Something passed between them that neither of them would have been able to accurately describe afterward. A recognition, maybe, or the specific silence that occurs when two people are standing in the wreckage of something and both understanding that what comes next is not going to be simple. But that was later. That was analysis. In the moment, it lasted 2 seconds, and then he bent slightly and carefully slid one arm under her knees and one behind her back. "I'm going to lift you," he said. "Tell me when it's too much." She set her right hand against his chest and he lifted her, and she made a single short sound against the pain, and then pressed her face into the lapel of his jacket and went quiet. He carried her to the elevator. Marco and Luca flanked them. The 2 other men remained in the apartment. Dante did not look back. Elena, from his arms, looked back once. Through the destroyed doorframe, across the wreckage of glass and overturned furniture, to where Victor Hale lay curled on his imported marble floor, surrounded by evidence of the life he'd built, and the man he actually was. She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she turned her face away. The elevator doors closed on the 32nd floor. Dante stood with her in his arms in the mirrored box, dropping toward the lobby, feeling her breathe against his jacket, her right hand still resting loosely on his chest. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper, not demanding answers, more like someone talking through the shock, trying to locate the edges of what had just happened. He considered several answers. "The wrong number," he said. She made a sound that might have been almost a laugh if everything hadn't hurt so much. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Dante carried Elena Mercer through the glass and marble of Riverside Tower, past the doorman who looked at the floor as they passed, through the revolving doors and into the Philadelphia night. The rain hadn't stopped. Three black SUVs waited at the curb, engines running, headlights cutting through the wet dark. Luca moved ahead to open the rear door of the center vehicle. Dante stepped off the curb into the rain without breaking stride, and the rain hit his jacket and Elena's borrowed coat, and the city reflected in the puddles around them. He got her settled in the back seat with the careful geometry of someone managing a fragile thing. And he climbed in beside her, and Luca shut the door, and the convoy moved. Elena leaned against the window. Her eyes were half closed. The adrenaline was draining out of her and leaving only the pain and the weight of the evening and the particular hollowness of someone who has been running on fear for so long that when the fear finally goes away, there's nothing immediately behind it. Dante looked straight ahead through the windshield at the wet streets. He was already thinking about the next problem, not Victor Hale. Victor Hale was dealt with for the moment, which was not the same as dealt with permanently, and he was already calculating what permanent would look like and what it would cost and whether the Pellegrino family connection would complicate it. Victor ran money for people who didn't like complications. Those people would notice when Victor stopped being functional. They would ask questions, but that wasn't the problem that was pressing on him right now. The problem was the phone. His private phone, with its 8 contacts and its unlisted number and its 11-year history of absolute discretion. Elena Mercer had sent a text to that number, which meant she had that number somewhere, which meant someone had given it to her or she had gotten it some other way. And either of those possibilities opened questions that needed answering before he could decide what the situation actually was. A wrong number was one thing. A wrong number at that address, with that message, on that specific line. That was something that needed to be understood. He glanced at her in the dark of the back seat. She had her eyes closed now, her right hand loose in her lap, his coat still around her shoulders. She was pale. Her arm needed medical attention, real attention, an ER, X-rays, probably a cast. He was taking her to a doctor he trusted, a man who had treated more than a few of Dante's people over the years, without asking questions that didn't need to be asked. She looked young, 26, Luca had said. She looked younger than that right now, sitting in the dark with her eyes closed and her arm broken, and 18 months of something terrible written in the set of her jaw. Dante looked back through the windshield. The convoy turned onto the highway, and in the pocket of his jacket, against his chest, his private phone buzzed. Not a text this time. An incoming call. From a number he didn't recognize. The call came on the 3rd ring. Dante looked at the number on the screen for exactly 2 seconds. Unknown. Not just unlisted, the display read a string of digits that didn't resolve into any recognizable area code, which meant it was either routed through something or generated by something, and neither of those options was casual. People who had your private number didn't call you from numbers like that. People who found your private number did. He answered it. He didn't speak first. That was a habit worn smooth by years of knowing that silence was a form of information. Whoever was on the other end would fill it, and what they chose to fill it with told you more than the question you might have asked. 3 seconds of quiet on the line. Then a voice he didn't know. Interesting night you're having. Male, older than 30, younger than 50. No particular regional accent that he could isolate. The kind of deliberate vocal neutrality that either meant media training or the specific discipline of someone who'd spent years learning not to give himself away in his voice. Dante said nothing. Riverside Tower, the voice continued. Apartment 12C. 3 black SUVs. You carried her out yourself. A brief pause. That's a detail that surprised me, honestly. I wouldn't have predicted that. Dante looked at the back of Luca's headrest. Luca was looking at the rearview mirror. He'd heard enough to know something was wrong. Who are you? Dante said. Not a question. The inflection was flat, which made it something more like a command to identify. Someone who's been watching Victor Hale for a while, the voice said, and someone who is now, because of what happened tonight, watching you. Elena had opened her eyes. The pain or the change in the car's atmosphere, probably both, had pulled her back from wherever she'd been drifting. She was looking at Dante's profile in the dark. He turned slightly away from her. Not dramatically, just a small repositioning of his shoulder, the body's instinct to create privacy in a confined space. Victor Hale is not your problem anymore tonight, the voice said. I decide what's my problem. That's what everyone says. There was something almost amused in it, not a laugh, more the quality of someone who has heard a particular sentence too many times to find it surprising. But you took something from me tonight. Specifically, you took the person I had in that apartment. The car moved through a yellow light. Rain on the windshield, the wipers keeping their rhythm. Explain that, Dante said. Victor Hale has been laundering money for 3 separate organizations for the past 4 years. One of them is yours, though you probably don't know his name specifically. He's several layers down in your financial architecture. One of them is the Pellegrino family, which you do know about. The third one is mine. The voice paused. We've been building a case. Tonight was supposed to be the night we moved. Dante was quiet. The woman, the voice said. She's not part of whatever this is. She lives in that apartment. She's been living in that apartment for 18 months. Whether she's part of it or not is a question I need answered, and I need it answered by her. Another pause. I need you to bring her in. No. The word came out immediately. No deliberation. Just the flat wall of it. Silence on the line. That's not... She has a broken arm, Dante said. She's going to a doctor. After that, she's somewhere safe. When she's had time to... I don't have time, the voice said. And for the first time, the veneer of control on the other end cracked slightly. A compression of impatience pushing through the neutral surface. Tonight changed things. Victor is going to run. When he runs, 3 years of work... Dante ended the call. He lowered the phone to his knee and looked at it for a moment like he was reading something in its blank screen, then slid it back into his jacket pocket. Luca had half turned in the front seat. You want to tell me what that was? Not yet. Dante? Not yet, Luca. Luca turned back forward. His jaw was set. Elena was watching Dante. He could feel it from the periphery. The specific quality of someone watching you very carefully because they've just understood that their situation is more complicated than they initially thought. Was that about me? She asked. He looked at her. She was pale, the broken arm held against her body, the coat around her shoulders. She was not, he realized, as fragile as she looked. There was something in her eyes underneath the pain and the shock, a quality of assessment, of paying close attention. Someone who had spent 18 months with Victor Hale had learned to read a room fast, because in that apartment reading the room fast was how you survived. It was about Victor, he said. That's not what I asked. He looked at her for another moment. We'll talk after the doctor. She held his gaze. She didn't like the answer. She accepted it, which was different. The convoy turned off the highway. Dr. Marcus Webb lived and worked out of a brownstone in the Fairmount neighborhood, 3 blocks from the art museum, in a building that looked from the street exactly like every other renovated brownstone on the block, and contained on its lower 2 floors a medical facility that was not listed in any directory and was not affiliated with any hospital system. Marcus Webb was 61 years old, had done 3 years of trauma surgery at Temple University Hospital before a particular professional complication had ended that career, and had been in Dante's orbit for 9 years. He was precise, discreet, and professionally incapable of being shaken by what came through his door. He met them at the back entrance. He looked at Elena's arm for 4 seconds before he spoke. Radial fracture, probably a clean break. I need the x-ray to be sure. He looked up at her face. Did you lose consciousness at any point? No. Hit your head? I hit my shoulder on the kitchen island, but not my head. He nodded, and something in the clinical efficiency of his assessment seemed to help Elena more than comfort would have. The simple, competent fact of someone treating her injury as a medical problem with medical solutions rather than a catastrophe. She straightened her spine slightly. Come in, Marcus said. Both of you can't come in. This last part was directed at Dante and Luca. Luca stopped at the door. Dante looked at Elena. She looked back at him. I'm going in, he said. Marcus opened his mouth. With her, Dante said. In the room. Marcus closed his mouth. He had opinions about this. He did not share them. In 9 years, he had developed a realistic understanding of which battles were worth engaging. The X-ray confirmed a clean fracture of the radius, mid-shaft. Marcus said it with a technique that made Elena exhale sharply through her nose and grip the padded table with her right hand, but she didn't make another sound. He gave her something for the pain. Not heavy, he said, because she'd need to stay alert, and he wanted to confirm she hadn't had a concussion before he sent her anywhere to sleep. He splinted the arm and began wrapping it with the focused silence of someone doing a thing they've done many times. Dante stood against the wall with his arms crossed. Elena watched the doctor work for a while. Then she said, "How do you know him?" "We have an arrangement," Dante said. "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where he doesn't ask me questions and I don't ask him questions." She looked at him. "You just asked me questions." "I asked you one thing." "You asked if Victor did it." She paused. "You already knew he did." Dante said nothing. Marcus finished the wrap and stepped back to assess his work. "You'll need to see an orthopedic surgeon in a few days for a proper cast. The splint will hold for now. Don't try to use it. Don't try to sleep on that side." He looked at Elena directly. "Is there somewhere safe you can go tonight?" Elena considered the question. The answer was more complicated than it should have been, which was its own kind of information about the past 18 months. Her apartment in South Philly, the one she'd given up when she moved into Victor's penthouse. Gone. Her mother's house in Wilmington. Possible. But her mother was 72, and getting a call at 2 in the morning with this story was not something she was prepared to do. Mia's apartment in Fishtown. "Yes," she said. "I need to borrow someone's phone first." Dante pulled his second phone, the normal one, the listed one, from his jacket pocket and held it out to her without comment. She took it. She dialed Mia's number from memory. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and Elena sat with the phone held against her ear in the fluorescent quiet of the medical room for a moment, then pulled it away and looked at the screen. She tried again. Voicemail. She left a message. Short, stripped down, the same instinct for efficiency that had characterized the text from the apartment. "Mia, it's me. I need to tell you some things. Call this number when you wake up. I'm okay. I'll explain." She handed the phone back to Dante. "Thank you," she said. And then, because she clearly felt the inadequacy of those 2 words for the scope of what had happened, she started to say something else. Dante shook his head slightly. She stopped. "Outside," he said. "When you're ready." He pushed off from the wall and walked out of the room, leaving Elena with Marcus in the antiseptic light, and he stood in the narrow hallway outside and looked at the wall opposite and let himself feel, for approximately 45 seconds, the thing he'd been holding at arm's length since the elevator at Riverside Tower. The weight of the evening, his mother's jaw, the sound, 20 years of building something and becoming someone and moving so far from that Brooklyn hallway that it felt like another life, another person, another century. And still, apparently, one text message in the right tone of voice from the right kind of pain, and he was standing in a stranger's medical facility at 1 in the morning with 4 men outside and a woman with a broken arm inside and a phone call from someone who knew his private number burning in the back of his skull. He pressed one hand flat against the wall. 45 seconds. Then he straightened and put his expression back where it needed to be and walked out to find Luca. Luca was standing by the back door, hands in his pockets. The particular stance of a man waiting to say something he'd been organizing for several minutes. He and Dante had been together long enough that he knew how to approach him and when, and his choice now to intercept immediately rather than wait was itself information. Something had developed. "Talk," Dante said. Marco called from the apartment. Luca's voice was low, face pointing slightly away, the posture of discreet conversation in a space where the walls were close. "Victor Hale is gone." Dante looked at him. "He left on foot about 8 minutes after we did. Marco says he took a bag, a specific bag, like a go bag, not just an overnight thing, pre-packed." Luca paused. "He didn't call anyone while he was in the apartment. He just grabbed the bag and left. He knew where he was going before tonight." "Marco thinks so, yeah." Dante processed this. Victor had a pre-packed bag, which meant Victor had, at some level, anticipated the possibility of needing to leave quickly, which meant Victor understood his own situation more clearly than someone who simply ran money for people and thought it was safe. Victor was afraid of something before tonight, something that had nothing to do with Dante. The voice on the phone. "We've been building a case." "The second thing," Luca said. Dante waited. "Pellegrino called. Anthony Pellegrino." Luca let that sit for a second. "Not his people. Him personally, on your business line." Another pause. He knows about tonight. How? He didn't say. You know Anthony. He talks like everything he knows he figured out himself, and you should be impressed. Luca looked at him. He was not happy about the apartment. Victor runs money for him. Victor ran money for him. Past tense, Anthony's framing. He said, and I'm repeating this exactly. He said, "Your friend made a mess I now have to clean up, and I'd appreciate a conversation." Luca's expression communicated his personal assessment of Anthony Pellegrino's tone without requiring additional words. Dante looked at the far end of the hallway. The Pellegrino family was the oldest continuous operation in the Philadelphia metro. Older than Dante's outfit, older than most of the current landscape, with roots that went back to a time when the city's underworld was organized along different lines entirely. Anthony was third generation, which gave him a kind of institutional weight that had very little to do with his actual competence and everything to do with the machinery he'd inherited. He was cautious to the point of cowardice, which meant he rarely made direct moves, which also meant when he called personally at 2 a.m, the math had shifted somewhere. "Tell him I'll call tomorrow," Dante said. He said tonight. "Tell him tomorrow." Luca pulled out his phone. He typed the message with the expression of someone who understood that they were transmitting an answer that would land badly and had made their peace with it. The back door opened and Elena came through it with Marcus behind her. The arm was splinted and wrapped, bound against her body in a sling. She'd washed her face at some point. The streaks were gone, leaving the clean lines of exhaustion underneath. She looked more herself, which was to say she looked more present, more contained, the shock having metabolized into something she was now actively managing rather than drowning in. She looked at Dante. She looked at Luca. She looked at the 2 other men near the door with the professional assessment of someone who had just updated her model of the situation. "Who was on the phone?" she asked. Dante turned to face her fully. In another context, he might have deflected. Not this, not now, the conversation for later. But she was standing in front of him with a broken arm and no phone and no apartment, and a night that had redrawn every line in her life. And the particular directness in her question had the quality of someone who had been managing on incomplete information for too long and was not willing to do it anymore. "Someone who says they were running an operation against Victor," he said. "They want to talk to you." Elena was very still. "They were watching the apartment," Dante continued. "They knew Victor. They knew about tonight within minutes." He watched her face. "They called my private line, which means they knew I was there, which means they have resources." He paused. "Do you know anything about Victor's business? The actual business, not the cover." She looked at him for a long time. "He moved money," she said carefully. "For who?" "He never told me specifics." She paused. "I knew there were things he didn't tell me. I stopped asking." Another pause, harder than the previous ones, the weight of a particular kind of shame that comes from realizing too late that you already knew something you were pretending not to know. There were calls he took in the other room, men who came to the apartment that weren't social. "I ate dinner in the bedroom once because he told me to." Dante held her gaze. "I'm not stupid," she said. "I know. She stopped. The sentence had somewhere to go and she chose not to let it go there. She exhaled. "What does this person want from me?" "I don't know yet." "But they called you." "Yes." "And you answered." "Yes." She looked at him with that same quality of assessment he'd clocked in the car, working it through, running the math. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why did you come tonight? Why did you answer the text?" She said it flatly, not accusatory, genuinely asking. "You don't know me. You could have decided it was a wrong number and moved on. Most people would." Dante said nothing for a moment. Marcus had quietly removed himself to a different part of the facility. Luca was studying his phone with the studied focus of a man who understood his role in this specific moment was to not exist. "My mother," Dante said. That was all he said. He didn't elaborate, and he didn't look away from her, and she understood from the 2 words and the way they came out. Stripped down, precise, the economy of someone saying something that cost them something, exactly what they contained. She didn't push it. She nodded once. "Okay," she said. "What happens now?" "You go somewhere safe. You sleep. In the morning when Mia calls..." "What happens with Victor?" Dante paused. "Victor ran," Luca said from his corner, still studying his phone. Elena's eyes moved to Luca, then back to Dante. She processed this. He had a pre-packed bag, Dante said. He left on foot within 10 minutes of us leaving. She was quiet for a moment. He has a place, she said slowly. He mentioned it once, not details, just that there was somewhere he could go if he needed to disappear for a while. He said it like it was a joke. I don't think it was a joke. Do you remember anything specific about what he said? She thought. The particular inward-looking expression of someone searching genuinely. He said it was near water. He said it was an hour from the city. She paused. He said, the kind of place nobody thinks to look because nobody thinks. She looked up. That's the exact phrase. He was drinking when he said it. He seemed pleased with himself. Dante looked at Luca. Luca was already typing. They stood in the back hallway of Marcus Webb's Fairmount Brownstone at 1:17 in the morning, and Dante looked at Elena and understood with the specific clarity of someone who has navigated complicated situations for a long time that the situation had just crossed a threshold it couldn't uncross. Elena Mercer had information. The voice on the phone wanted Elena Mercer. Victor Hale was in the wind with a pre-packed bag and presumably enough resources to stay there. And Anthony Pellegrino, who never called personally, had called personally. These were not separate problems. They were one problem with multiple doors, and Dante was standing in the middle of it whether he'd chosen to be or not. He had chosen to be. That was the honest accounting. He could have let this text go unanswered. He could have told Luca it was a wrong number and turned back to his drink at Club Serafino and let the night continue on its original trajectory. He hadn't. He'd said get the car and meant it, and everything that followed was the consequence of that 6-word decision, and he was not the kind of man who spent time wishing his decisions had been different. You made them, and you lived inside them. He was living inside this one. You're not going to Mia's tonight, he said. Elena looked at him. Someone watched that apartment. Someone knows your face. If they have resources enough to find my private number, they have resources enough to find Mia Vasquez's address. He let her work through the logic of it herself, watching her face, waiting for the resistance. My people have a place. It's secure. Nobody goes there without my knowing. The resistance arrived. He saw it cross her face. The instinct to refuse, to assert, the very reasonable and well-earned reluctance to place herself in the care of another man she didn't know in a situation she didn't understand. After 18 months with Victor, trusting someone was not a thing her nervous system was going to do on faith. I'm not Victor, he said quietly. I know you're not Victor. She said it immediately, with a sharpness that indicated she resented the implication that she needed telling. I've met men like Victor before. You're not one of them. Then, you're something else, she said. I don't know what yet. He accepted that. It was fair. Come with us tonight, he said. Tomorrow you know more. Tomorrow you make different decisions if that's what you want. He paused. But tonight, you're not safe on your own, and you know that. She held his gaze for a long beat, one of the longer silences he'd encountered in recent memory. Then she looked at her arm in its sling. Do you have ibuprofen anywhere? She asked. We'll find some. Okay, she said. They went out through the back door into the rain. The convoy was still waiting. Luca opened the door. Elena climbed in without assistance, which required a careful rearrangement of her arm and a tightening of her jaw and no request for help. And Dante noted all three of these things and noted what they told him about her. The convoy moved, 14 minutes north and east, through streets that were mostly empty at this hour. The rain thinning slightly but still present. The city sliding past in its midnight register of half-lit windows and wet pavement. Dante's phone did not ring again. This was not reassuring. The voice on the line had been told no, and people with enough resources to find his private number did not absorb no in silence. They regrouped. They found other approaches. He was thinking about what other approaches looked like when Luca spoke from the front seat without turning around. We've got a car. Where? 3 back, silver Civic. It picked us up when we left Marcus's place. A pause. It's been careful. 1 lane change for every 2 of ours. But it's there. Dante turned to the rear window with the casual motion of someone adjusting in their seat. Dark street, yellow headlights, The indistinct shapes of vehicles maintaining highway following distance. 3 cars back. Silver, he couldn't confirm the make from here, but the behavior was textbook. The particular discipline of a tail that knew what it was doing. Don't lose them yet, Dante said. Luca's eyes in the mirror. You sure? I want to know where they stop following, what that tells us about what they know. Elena, next to him, was looking at his face. She had heard enough. Someone is following us, she said. Yes. She absorbed this without panic, which confirmed the thing he'd been clocking about her since the apartment. She was afraid. Her breathing was slightly elevated, a fine tension in the line of her shoulders, but she processed fear differently than most people. She didn't let it make decisions for her. The person on the phone, she said. Possibly. Or someone else. Possibly, he said again. She looked out the back window. Victor has people too, she said quietly. I don't know who. I never met them. But there were nights he was afraid of something I couldn't see, and it wasn't me. He was afraid of someone who could actually hurt him. She paused. I thought about that sometimes. What someone would have to be to make Victor Hale afraid. Dante looked at her profile against the rain-dark window. And now you're looking at one, he said. She turned from the window. 2, she said. Now I'm looking at 2. The convoy made a turn onto a narrower street, and 3 blocks later Luca spoke again, the tone fractionally different. The register that Dante had learned to read as something has changed. It's not a Civic, Luca said. I had Marco drop back and close the distance. A pause. It's a department vehicle. Unmarked. Philadelphia PD plates confirmed. The car was quiet for 2 full seconds. Detective plates, Luca added, which means someone made a call, Dante said. Not Victor. Victor was running. Not the voice on the phone, whoever that was. They weren't calling the police. They were trying to avoid the police. Someone else. Someone who had been at that building tonight. Someone who had seen Dante Salvatore carry Elena Mercer out of Riverside Tower and made a very specific decision about what that information was worth and who to sell it to. The doorman. Dante pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. Options, he said to Luca. Split the convoy. Get her somewhere clean. Luca's voice was flat, professional. The problem-solving cadence of someone who had navigated this kind of situation before. But if they have the plates, they already have a partial picture. They don't know where we're going. They don't need to know where we're going, Luca said. They know we were at Riverside Tower. They have her description. They pull the building cameras. They have her face. A pause. They're going to want to talk to her. And if she was in that apartment when a man got beaten, she's the victim, Elena said. Both men looked at her. My arm is broken, she said. Victor Hale broke it. He's the one who... You weren't the one who put him on the floor, Luca said carefully. No. She held his gaze. You were. Luca looked at the windshield. Dante sat with the weight of the car moving through rain and the lights of the city smearing past, and the specific point they had just reached in the evening. The point where the variables exceeded the plan, where the thing you thought was a contained situation revealed its actual size, which was larger, much larger. He looked at Elena. She looked back at him. I need to know something, he said. Ask. The person who was going to help you tonight, before you called me. He watched her face. Who was it, exactly? Mia. Mia Vasquez. She's... I know you said Mia. I mean... He paused, choosing the precision of his words carefully. When you typed that number, was that Mia's number? Elena went still. It was a particular kind of stillness, the kind that occurs in the half-second when a piece of information you've been carrying without knowing its weight suddenly reveals what it is. She stopped. I haven't called Mia in a few months. Victor didn't... She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. He isolated me from her. It was gradual. By the time I noticed what he was doing, it was... She exhaled. She switched carriers. She told me about it. I meant to update the number in my phone. You didn't, Dante said. No. So the number you had stored under her name is old. She looked at him, the full implication of it arriving in her face in real time. I texted a wrong number. Yes. Your number. Yes. She looked at her hands, at the sling, at the middle distance that people look at when they are reassessing the architecture of an evening. And if you hadn't answered, she said slowly, you'd be in that apartment, Dante said, alone, with Victor. He came back. She already knew this. He'd told her. But hearing it stated plainly, in sequence, with the doorless logic of cause and effect, she closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, there was something in them harder than what had been there before. Not gratitude. Something beyond gratitude. The thing that lives on the other side of it, which is a reckoning. And now, she said, there's a police car following us, and Victor is gone, and someone knows your number who shouldn't, and you have an angry man named Pellegrino calling you. She said it back to him like an inventory. Because of a wrong number. That's correct. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her. Don't be, he said. The car stopped at a light. Rain. The unmarked vehicle 3 cars back holding its patient distance. The city wrapped around all of them in its vast, indifferent, wet dark. Dante picked up his regular phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. It's me, he said when it connected. I need the 22nd Street location opened. Tonight. A pause, listening. Yes, tonight, 2 hours. Another pause. And I need you to run a name. Elena Mercer, 26, Philadelphia. I want everything. He paused one more time. And call Reeves. He hung up. Elena was watching him. Who's Reeves? She asked. An attorney. Your attorney? One of them. He looked at her. He doesn't answer questions about his clients, and his clients don't answer questions without him in the room. That applies to you now, if you want it to. She considered this. The math of it, accepting this man's lawyer, this man's safe house, this man's protection, the full weight of what that meant and what it cost and what it made her. And what do you want in return? She asked. It was the right question. He would have thought less of her for not asking it. I want to know what you know about Victor, he said. Everything. Not just what you think matters. Everything. The calls, the men who came to the apartment, the things he said when he was drinking. All of it. That's all? That's where we start, he said. The light changed. The convoy moved. 3 blocks later, Luca's voice came low and precise from the front seat, stripped of any inflection that wasn't informational. They're not following anymore, he said. The tail dropped off at the last intersection. Dante looked at the rear window. Wet street. Empty. They know where we're going, Luca said. No, Dante said. They know where we've been. He paused. They stopped because they already have what they came for. He looked at his phone in his hand. They weren't following us to find out where we're going. They were confirming who was in the car. Luca's eyes in the mirror. And now they know, Dante said. He looked at Elena. She understood it a half second before he said it. He could see it arrive in her face, the specific expression of someone who has just grasped that the problem is not the problem they thought it was. His own phone, the private phone, the one with 8 contacts, buzzed in his inside pocket. Not a call this time. A text. He pulled it out and read it, and the thing that happened in his expression was small and specific and contained, the micro-adjustment of someone absorbing information that changes the map. He looked at the text for 2 seconds. 3. He turned the screen so Elena could read it. 4 words. Bring her in, now. Beneath that, a single photograph. The photograph showed Marcus Webb's back entrance. Grainy, time-stamped, clearly from a street camera or a positioned phone. It showed Dante carrying Elena out of the building. It showed her face. And in the corner of the photograph, barely visible, a badge clipped to a belt. Luca, who had not seen the screen, spoke from the front. Dante, he said, we've got a problem. I know, Dante said. Marco just called. There are 2 more units outside the 22nd Street location. Luca's voice was very controlled now, the flat control of a man reporting a fire while standing in it. They were already there before you made the call. Dante stared at the 4 words on the screen. Bring her in, now! Elena was looking at him. What does this mean? She asked. It means, Dante said slowly, that someone has been watching me. The word landed in the car and sat there. Not Victor, Elena said. Not Pellegrino. No. The person on the phone. Dante looked at the photograph again. The badge in the corner, the specific angle of the camera, the timestamp reading 1:22 a.m. Tell me, Elena said quietly. Is that a federal badge? Dante said nothing. Elena looked at the photograph one more time and then looked up at him with an expression that was very steady and very tired and cut cleanly through every version of the evening's events to the single worst possibility at the center of all of them. They weren't watching Victor, she said. She said it like a statement. He didn't correct her. They were watching you. The convoy moved through the rain and the city and the silence that follows. The moment you realize the ground you thought you were standing on is not the ground at all, and somewhere behind them and ahead of them and in the phone in his hand, the walls of the room were moving inward. The convoy pulled into an underground parking structure on Arch Street at 1:44 in the morning, and Dante told the driver to kill the lights before they reached the second level. They sat in the dark for 30 seconds. Nobody spoke. The rain drummed on the concrete ceiling above the entry ramp, muffled and continuous. The engine ticked as it cooled. Luca had his hand near his jacket in the front seat and wasn't trying to be subtle about it. The two men in the trailing SUV were already out and moving through the structure's lower level in opposite directions, doing the sweep that Dante hadn't needed to ask for because they knew their jobs. Elena sat beside Dante with her arm in its sling and her back very straight and her eyes moving across the windshield with the careful inventory of someone cataloging exits. He'd noticed that about her. The way she read rooms, the way she tracked doors. 18 months of living with Victor Hale had rewired her spatial instincts in ways that were going to take longer than one night to undo. Talk to me, Dante said to Luca. Marcus's back entrance is covered, which means they had a unit positioned before you called for the location. That's not reactive surveillance. Luca turned halfway in his seat. They had a pre-positioned asset, which means they knew the medical location. Or they followed us from Riverside Tower and got ahead of us on the route. 12 minutes from the tower to Marcus's. You'd need to know the city, know our patterns, know which medical facility. Luca stopped. He didn't finish the sentence because finishing it meant saying the thing neither of them wanted to say directly yet. Someone gave them Marcus, Dante said. Luca looked at the steering wheel. Someone in my circle gave them Marcus, Dante said. The structure around them was dim and concrete and smelled of oil and damp. 3 levels of shadow above them. The sweep team moving somewhere in the dark below. Elena had gone very still beside him in the way she went still when she was absorbing something and not yet ready to speak. It's a federal case, Dante said. Whatever they're building, it's federal. Local PD doesn't tail with that kind of coordination. They don't have pre-positioned assets at a private medical facility. He looked at his private phone. The 4-word text sat on the screen. Bring her in, now. They've been building towards something for long enough that they have resources in place. That means months, minimum. Victor, Luca said. Victor's part of it, not the whole thing. Dante set the phone face down on his knee. Think about the voice on the call. He said Victor launders for 3 organizations. One of them is ours, buried in the architecture, he said, which means he knows our financial structure at a level that requires either significant investigation or inside information. He paused. He knew I was at Riverside Tower within minutes. He had my private number. He had Marcus's location. He let those 3 things sit in the air of the car. That's not surveillance. That's access. The word access hung there, and Luca didn't say anything for 4 seconds, which was a long time for Luca. How long has the private number been the same? Elena asked. Both men looked at her. Your private phone, she said. How long have you had that specific number? 4 years, Dante said. And the 8 people who have it, she said carefully. Has that number changed? Any additions in the last year or so? Dante looked at her. She met his gaze steadily. I'm just thinking out loud. Victor got a new accountant 14 months ago. Someone he trusted, someone who came recommended. I didn't think anything of it at the time. She paused. 3 months after that, something changed in Victor. The way he was on the phone, the way he checked the locks at night. She shifted slightly, the movement pulling at her arm, and she absorbed the pain with a small, controlled tightening around the eyes. Someone new came into his circle and changed the atmosphere of the entire apartment. I thought it was a new client, something higher risk than usual. But, Dante said, but Victor was afraid of this person, she said. Not the way he was afraid of business complications, the way you're afraid of someone who has something on you. Dante looked at Luca. Luca looked at Dante. Thomas, Luca said. The name came out of him flat and quiet, and with the specific weight of a word you don't want to say, the weight of something you've been arguing against in your own head for longer than you've been saying it out loud. Dante said nothing. Thomas Reed, Luca said. He came to us 14 months ago. Recommendation through Caruso in Baltimore. He stopped. He runs 3 shell accounts in our financial layer. He has access to the medical facility roster because I put him on the emergency contacts list when he joined. Luca's voice had taken on a particular texture. The flat, deliberately controlled voice of a man managing something that is trying to become panic. He has the private number because you gave it to him when he came on. Standard for inner circle. I know what I gave him, Dante said. And he came from a Caruso recommendation, Luca said. Caruso, who we haven't spoken to in 6 months because Caruso's Baltimore operation got picked apart by a federal task force, Dante said. The parking structure was very quiet. Caruso's case, Luca said slowly, started how long ago? 18 months, roughly. And Thomas Reed appeared in our circle 14 months ago. Luca put both hands on top of the steering wheel and looked at them. They flipped Caruso, he said. Caruso gave them Thomas as an introduction. Thomas came in as a plant. He exhaled through his nose. 14 months. He's been inside for 14 months. Dante sat with this. 14 months. He thought about what 14 months meant in terms of access. 14 months of financial architecture. 14 months of operational structure. 14 months of names, locations, the particular geography of how things worked and who did what and where the pressure points were. 14 months of being inside the room where decisions were made while transmitting the contents of that room to people who wanted to use it as a map for dismantling everything. He thought about his mother in a different way now. Not with grief, with a particular cold anger. The anger that comes when you understand that something you built and protected with great care and cost has been eaten from the inside by something you let in yourself. His jaw was tight. "Where is Thomas tonight?" he said. He checked in at 11, said he was at the Serafino for the weekly review. "Is he still there?" Luca was already on the phone. A brief exchange, low and quick. He put the phone down. "Gone. Left around midnight, told the staff he was getting air." "Right when we were at Riverside Tower," Dante said. "Yes. Pull up everything on his access. Right now. Everything he touched in the last 2 weeks. Every account he has visibility on. Every contact in his phone that routes through our network." Dante's voice had not changed volume or speed. It was the same flat, quiet cadence it always was, and that was what made it what it was. "And find out where he is." "On it!" Luca was dialing. Dante looked at Elena. She had heard all of it, and she was looking at him with an expression that mixed the specific discomfort of someone who knows they are in possession of information they didn't ask for with something else. A grim recognition, the look of someone who has lived inside a betrayal long enough to recognize its shape in another form. "I'm sorry," she said. "Stop apologizing." "I'm not apologizing for myself," she said. "I know what it feels like. To find out someone you trusted was—" She stopped. Let the sentence close itself. He looked at her. "Victor," he said. "Victor wasn't a plant. He wasn't sent to destroy me. He was just—" She made a small, tired motion with her right hand. "He was just someone I chose badly." She paused. "But the effect is similar. You build something around a person, and then you find out the person was never what you thought, and everything you built on top of them is—" She looked at her sling. "The arm is fine. It'll heal. The other part takes longer." Dante held her gaze. "In another life, in a life without the private phone buzzing and the federal tail and Thomas Reed's 14 months of damage sitting in the architecture of everything he'd built, he might have stayed in that sentence with her for a moment. He noted it and moved past it. "We can't stay here," he said to Luca. "I know. 22nd Street is compromised. Marcus is burned, at least temporarily. He thought through the inventory of locations, eliminated 3 immediately because Thomas had touched them, narrowed to 2. The Kensington warehouse. Thomas doesn't have the address. It was before his time and I kept it off the shared roster. It's not set up for... It doesn't need to be set up. It needs to be 4 walls and a door that locks. He looked at Elena. Can you walk? I've been walking, she said. They moved out of the convoy vehicle, through the parking structure's lower level where the sweep team materialized from the dark and fell in without instruction, up a stairwell that smelled of concrete and old water, out a side entrance onto a street that was empty and rain-wet and reflected the amber of the streetlights in long, wavering lines across the asphalt. No vehicles at the curb except a panel van that belonged to a plumbing company and was in fact a plumbing company's van and not theirs, which was the point. Luca had called ahead. 2 vehicles waiting 2 blocks east, different plates, no connection to the convoy. The transfer took 4 minutes. They were moving again by 2:03 a.m. Elena sat in the back of a dark gray Suburban that smelled faintly of cigarettes and was not as clean as the previous vehicle, and said nothing for the first 5 minutes. Dante sat beside her, Luca in the front, one man driving, one in the trailing car. The city moved past. The voice on the phone, Elena said eventually. The one who said they were building a case against Victor. Yes. Could it be Thomas? Dante had already considered this. No, the voice was federal. The coordination was federal. Thomas is an inside asset. He feeds information. He doesn't run operations. He looked at the rain on the window. The voice on the phone is the operation. Thomas is a source they were running inside my organization to build the larger case. Different layers. So there's a federal investigation into Victor. And into me. She absorbed this. And they want me because I was in that apartment. They want you because 18 months in that apartment makes you a potential witness, Dante said. What you heard, what you saw, who you met. If they're building a financial case against Victor, and by extension against the organizations he serviced, including mine, a live-in witness who was present for 18 months of operational life is worth a great deal to them. I don't know anything useful, she said. You know more than you think. You told me yourself the calls he took, the men who came to the apartment. You know faces, you know timing, you know patterns. He paused. You know about the go bag. You know about the place near the water. He looked at her. They will sit you in a room and go through your memory hour by hour for weeks, and they will find things you don't know you have. She was quiet. And what happens to you in that scenario? She said. While they're going through my memory, they use what you give them to build what they already have. Against you. Among others. She turned to look at him directly. In the dark of the car, her face was composed, the exhaustion underneath it held back by something that was more than adrenaline, something structural, the specific endurance of someone who has had the option of falling apart and has decided against it. I was in that apartment for 18 months, she said, and I don't know your name. Dante Salvatore. I know that. I mean, I didn't know your name before tonight. I had never heard of you. She paused. Victor never mentioned you. He wouldn't. I'm buried in his architecture, like the man on the phone said. But you know about him. I know about most things in this city that move money. So if I sit in their room and go through my memory, she said, and they ask me about names, about people Victor talked about, feared, dealt with, your name doesn't come up because I genuinely don't know it. Dante looked at her. Victor was careful about that, she said slowly, thinking it through in real time. He never said names, descriptions sometimes, references, the people I work with. A client who needs. He never gave me names, she paused. I thought it was compartmentalization, keeping me separate from the business. It was, Dante said. Or, she said, it was insurance. If something went wrong, the less I knew meant the less I could give them. Dante said nothing. Which means, she said, that I'm not as useful to them as they think I am. You're useful enough, but not maximally useful. She looked at the back of Luca's head. They don't know that yet. They think I'm a full witness. They don't know what Victor kept from me. She turned back to Dante. Which gives us something. Luca had half turned. She's not wrong. Dante looked at Elena for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required. "You've thought about this kind of thing before," he said. "I thought about escaping that apartment approximately 400 times," she said. "You spend enough time planning escapes, you get good at identifying leverage." The Suburban moved northeast into Kensington, where the city changed register. The glass towers of Center City replaced by row houses and industrial buildings, and the particular nighttime quiet of a neighborhood that went to sleep early because it worked early. The warehouse sat at the end of a short block behind a chain-link fence, a two-story brick building that had processed textiles in a previous decade and now processed nothing, its windows dark, its loading dock empty. They pulled in through a side gate and Luca killed the headlights. Inside was what warehouses are: concrete floor, exposed ceiling joist, the smell of old industry and dust and cold that comes when a building is not regularly heated. Luca had called ahead, and someone had been there before them. A folding table, 2 chairs, a space heater running in the corner, a bag on the table that turned out to contain water bottles, a pharmacy bag with ibuprofen and the other supplies Marcus had listed, and a sleeping bag still in its packaging. Basic, functional, the minimum infrastructure of a place to think. Elena sat in one of the folding chairs and took 3 ibuprofen and drank half a water bottle without being asked to do either. Dante stood by the table and looked at his phone. The private phone, the normal phone. Thomas Reed had not called either of them since midnight. His location was not coming back on the network. He'd either killed his phone or dumped it. "What's the damage assessment?" Dante said to Luca. Luca had been working his tablet continuously since the parking structure. He sat on the edge of the table and held it two-handed and went through it with the methodical grimness of someone reading a report on a disaster they partially saw coming. 3 shell accounts compromised. Confirmed. The transaction patterns for the last 14 months show data pulls at intervals that align with Thomas's access logs. He scrolled. The medical facility roster, the 22nd Street location, the Serafino's private entrance code. He paused. The private phone number, confirmed. Another pause. Caruso's Baltimore contacts, who we've been treating as neutral. He set the tablet down. And the Pellegrino connection. What about Pellegrino? Thomas attended 2 of the 3 meetings where the Pellegrino arrangement was discussed. Luca looked at the table. If they have those meetings, they have Anthony too, Dante said, which is why Anthony called tonight. He knows something broke. He doesn't know what yet, but he felt it. Luca pressed his mouth into a flat line. He's going to panic. Anthony panicking is dangerous, Dante said. Anthony panicking is extremely dangerous, Luca agreed. A man who ran a family operation on inherited weight rather than real competence, cornered and frightened, was the kind of problem that didn't resolve itself. It accelerated in whatever direction was directly in front of it, and what was directly in front of Anthony Pellegrino right now was Dante Salvatore, who had the same federal agency apparently building cases in both their directions, and who had tonight beaten one of Anthony's primary financial assets badly enough that the man was currently running with a go bag. He'll try to make a deal, Dante said. Before us, Luca said. He'll try to get there first. He's already trying. Dante set his phone on the table. The call wasn't about the apartment. The call was to see if I knew, how much I knew, how I'd respond. He was reading me. Did he get anything? I told him tomorrow. He'll read that as you being calm, which means you're not panicking, which means you either know less than him or more than him. Luca rubbed his face with one hand. He'll decide you know more. Which means he moves faster. Tonight, probably. They both understood what tonight meant in Anthony Pellegrino's vocabulary. Not a phone call, not a sit-down. Anthony making a move tonight meant Anthony using the particular blunt instrument that 3-generation mob families kept sharpened for the moments when they felt the walls moving inward. Elena had been listening to all of it from the folding chair with both feet flat on the concrete floor and her right hand resting on her knee, and her eyes moving between the 2 men with the attentiveness of someone who understands they are sitting in a room where the decisions being made have immediate relevance to whether they survive the next 24 hours. If Pellegrino makes a deal with the federal investigators, she said, he provides them information in exchange for immunity, Dante said, and if he provides them your financial structure, then the case they've been building with Thomas's information becomes prosecutable. He looked at her. 14 months of inside access plus a cooperating witness from the Pellegrino organization is enough to... He stopped. To what? She said. He looked at her steadily. To end this, he said. She held his gaze. She understood what end this meant. Not prison, though prison was in that sentence. The larger ending. The thing that 14 months of infiltration and federal coordination was actually designed to produce. The dismantling not just of the financial structure, but of the operational structure, the people structure, the entire architecture of the life he'd spent 15 years building. She looked at the concrete floor for a moment. Then she said, "Then we need to find Thomas." Dante looked at her. "Not Pellegrino," she said. "Pellegrino is already in motion. You said so yourself, and panicking men don't change direction once they're moving. You can't stop that tonight." She looked up. "But Thomas hasn't delivered yet. Whatever he hasn't given it to them, or they wouldn't need me. They'd already have enough." She paused. "The text. Bring her in now." "That's not confidence. That's urgency. They're missing something, and they think I have it." "The financial records," Luca said slowly, following it. "Victor kept physical records. Off-network. It's why Thomas couldn't—" "Physical records of what?" Elena said. "Transactions. The actual transaction records, not the shell account summaries. The paper trail that connects the shells to the real sources." Luca straightened. "We've been looking for those for months. Victor is paranoid about digital. He kept physical copies of certain documents as his own insurance." He looked at Dante. "If Federal has Thomas's data, but not the physical records, the case has a gap. A significant gap." "Victor would have taken them," Dante said. "The go bag." "Or," Elena said, and something in her voice made both men look at her immediately, the quality of a word that's about to contain something significant. "Or they're not with Victor at all." She looked at her hands. "Victor had a safe," she said, "behind the Basquiat print in the bedroom. I knew about it. He didn't know I knew." She paused. "He changed the combination twice that I saw him do it. I was supposed to be asleep both times." A small, grim expression crossed her face. "Victor underestimated me consistently. It was one of his most reliable qualities." "You know the combination," Dante said. "I know both combinations." She met his gaze. "He tends to use dates, significant ones. I've had 14 months more than you've had to pay attention to which dates matter to Victor Hale." The warehouse was quiet around them. The space heater pushed warm air into the cold dark. Outside, the rain had finally slowed to something less aggressive. A thin, steady presence rather than the violent curtain of earlier. Dante looked at Elena Mercer in the folding chair with her broken arm and her 3 ibuprofen and her 14 months of careful, involuntary intelligence gathering, and he felt something he didn't have a simple name for. Not admiration exactly, though that was in it. Something that acknowledged a specific kind of survival, the kind that requires you to be paying attention every moment for a very long time while appearing not to be. "If those records are in that safe," Luca said, "and Federal doesn't have them, then we have leverage," Dante said. "Over Federal? Over the case." He turned the thought in his head, the chess of it. "The case needs the physical records to be prosecutable. If we have the physical records, we control what the case becomes." He paused. "Or what it doesn't become." "The apartment is going to be on their radar," Luca said. "After tonight, after the tale, after everything. They might have a unit on it already." "Or they might not," Elena said, "because they don't know I know about the safe. They think I'm with you, and they think you're keeping me away from the apartment. Why would they be watching a location they don't think we'd go near?" "Because they're thorough," Luca said. "Yes," she said. "But are they fast enough?" She looked at Dante. "Riverside Tower's security desk logs visitor access, but the elevator bank on the south side has a maintenance override. It bypasses the front desk entirely. Victor showed it to me once. He used it when he didn't want certain visitors logged." She paused. "I still have my access card for the penthouse. He didn't take it before he left. He assumed I couldn't get to my feet." Another thing Victor had underestimated. Dante stood very still for a moment with all of this arranged in front of him. The federal case, Thomas Reed's 14 months, Anthony Pellegrino's terror moving him toward a deal, the physical records in a safe behind a Basquiat print in a penthouse that was now potentially under federal surveillance, a woman with a broken arm and an access card and 2 combination sequences stored in memory, and outside the warehouse, the city doing what the city did, indifferent and wet and full of moving parts. He looked at Luca. Luca looked back at him with an expression that said, "I already know what you're about to say, and I have objections, and I'm going to state them clearly. It's a two-person job in there, Dante said. Quiet entry, targeted extraction, out in under 6 minutes. If there's a unit on the building, then we don't go in. And if there isn't, and we go in and Thomas has already called it in, then we deal with that. Dante. Luca set this tablet on the table. You personally going back into that building tonight is, the records are what ends this, Dante said. Pellegrino making a deal before we get to the records is what ends this differently. He held Luca's gaze. Clock. Luca pressed his lips together. She's not going in, Luca said, meaning Elena. I am, actually, Elena said. Both men looked at her. She stood up from this folding chair. The movement cost her something. Her jaw tightened and she exhaled through her nose, and she stood up anyway and faced them with the particular vertical quality of someone who has made a decision and is not inviting discussion on its fundamentals. I know where the safe is. I know the combination. I know the layout of that apartment in the dark because I've navigated it in the dark many times for reasons I'm not going to get into. She looked at Luca. You've never been in there. Going in blind on a 6-minute window is how you spend 4 minutes finding the bedroom. She looked at Dante. I go. You keep me moving. Your arm, Luca said. My arm doesn't open safes, she said. My right hand does. Luca looked at the ceiling of the warehouse with the expression of a man who is losing an argument he hasn't technically started yet. Dante looked at Elena. She looked back at him. There was something in this moment. The two of them in the cold warehouse at 2-something in the morning, 14 months of different kinds of damage between them, a decision about to be made that neither of them had been positioned to make at the start of the evening, that had the quality of a hinge, the particular before and after weight of a moment that you'll be able to point to later and say, that was where the road forked. 6 minutes, he said. 6 minutes, she said. If anything feels wrong on approach, we pull back. No hesitation, no heroics. Agreed. And when we're out, with or without the records, you tell me everything. All of it. The calls, the names, the patterns, everything you have. She nodded. In exchange, he said, I make sure that the people currently trying to put you in a room and use, you don't get the chance. He held her gaze. You're not a witness in this case. You're a woman who sent a text to the wrong number. That's the story, and I will make it the only story. She was quiet for a second. You can do that, she said. Not a question. More like confirming an assessment. Yes. She looked at him for another beat. Okay, she said. Luca was already pulling up the building schematics on his tablet, cross-referencing traffic camera feeds in the surrounding blocks. The particular focused competence of someone who has shifted from objection to execution. He found the south maintenance entrance, the elevator shaft access, the camera coverage gaps. 1 unit, he said. Southeast corner of the building, stationary, unmarked, but the positioning is coverage-oriented, not traffic. Watching the main entrance, Dante said. And the primary elevator bank. The maintenance elevator on the south side comes out in the parking sublevel, which connects to, Luca traced the route, the residential corridor that bypasses the lobby entirely. Coverage on the sublevel entrance? Building camera, not external. Building security won't flag it as long as the access card reads clean. It will, Elena said. Luca looked at the time on his tablet. If Pellegrino is moving tonight, we have maybe 90 minutes before that situation changes the entire board. After that, whatever he tells them, then we move in 30 minutes, Dante said. He looked at Elena. She was standing in the cold of the warehouse with her sling and her access card, and the two combinations in her head, and she looked back at him with that particular quality that he'd been noting since the apartment, that core of readiness underneath the exhaustion, the thing that hadn't broken even when the arm did. 30 minutes. Luca stepped outside to make calls. The men outside the warehouse moved in the dark, doing the things men in that line of work do before a thing happens. The space heater hummed. The rain tapped the roof. Dante sat on the edge of the table and looked at the floor and ran the next 2 hours through his head in sequence, testing the variables, finding the weak points. He found one he didn't like. Thomas Reed. Thomas who had been inside for 14 months. Thomas who had access to the private phone number, the financial architecture, the medical facility. Thomas who had disappeared at midnight. Thomas who, if he had been thorough, And a man who spent 14 months maintaining cover without detection was by definition thorough, might have had access to something Dante had not yet accounted for. Dante picked up his private phone. He went to the contact list. 8 entries. He looked at them one by one. His attorney, his doctor, Luca, Marco, his sister, 2 business associates whose reliability he was currently revising, and the 8th, Thomas Reed. He opened the contact, looked at the record. Call history, normal. Text, normal. The last contact 3 days ago, a routine check-in, nothing that had flagged anything in Dante's perception at the time, but underneath the contact name, in the notes field, there was something he didn't put there. 4 words. The same 4 words from the earlier text. Bring her in. Now. But that wasn't what made his chest go cold. What made his chest go cold was the timestamp on the note. It had been added to Thomas Reed's contact file at 10:34 p.m., before the text from Elena, before Riverside Tower, before any of it. Bring her in. Now. Timestamped 10:34 p.m., which meant the message wasn't a response to tonight. It was a directive that had been waiting in his phone, planted in his own contact file by someone with access to his device, for the moment that Elena Mercer entered the equation. They had known she would. They had known before tonight that she would. Dante sat on the edge of the table in the Kensington warehouse and held his private phone in both hands and felt the architecture of the evening rearrange itself around this single fact into a shape that was entirely different from the shape he'd been working with. This wasn't a case being built. This was a trap being closed. And the bait, the text message, the wrong number, the broken arm, and the rain, and Elena Mercer on the floor of apartment 12C. He looked up. Elena was watching him from across the warehouse. She had seen something change in his face. Her eyes were sharp. "What?" she said. Dante set the phone down on the table. The word he was about to say would change everything she thought she knew about tonight, about the wrong number, about the accident of a dying battery and a misdirected text in a dark apartment. He looked at her. "How well," he said quietly, "do you know Mia Vasquez?" The question landed in the warehouse the way a stone lands in still water, the impact small, the rings spreading outward until they touched every edge. Elena did not answer immediately. That was the first thing. Not because she was thinking about whether to answer, but because the question itself had done something to her face. A micro-expression, gone in under a second, the specific involuntary contraction of someone who has been asked the exact question they were not prepared for. Dante had spent 15 years reading rooms and reading faces, and that fraction of a second told him more than a full sentence would have. He waited. "She's my best friend," Elena said. "For how long?" "Since college, sophomore year. We were in the same—" She stopped. "Why are you asking me this?" Dante held up the private phone. He turned its screen out and held it steady until she could read the notes field on Thomas Reed's contact entry. The 4 words. The timestamp. He watched her read it once and then read it again and then look up at him. Her face had gone a different kind of still. 10:34, she said. "PM," he confirmed. "Tonight. Before your text. Before Riverside Tower. Before any of this." She was quiet. "They knew you'd text me," he said. "They knew you'd use that number. They knew what the message would say, and they had a directive already loaded in my phone for when it arrived." He set the phone on the table. "That's not coincidence, that's staging." Elena stood in the middle of the warehouse floor, and the space heater pushed warm air across the concrete, and she didn't move for a very long time. "The carrier switch," she said finally. Dante waited. "Mia told me she switched carriers 3 weeks ago." Elena's voice had changed. The warmth had gone out of it, not replaced by coldness exactly, but by the particular flatness of someone running a very unpleasant calculation and not yet ready to accept the result. "She told me she had a new number and I should update my contacts. I said I would." She looked at the floor. "I didn't. I kept forgetting. And Mia didn't. She didn't follow up about it. She mentioned it once and then nothing." "If you updated the contact," Dante said, "the text goes to the new number, to Mia." "And Mia comes to the apartment," Elena said, "or calls the police. Or—" She stopped. "Instead," Dante said, "you text the old number, the number that, if someone had arranged things correctly, Routes to me. How? Elena said. How does someone arrange that a disconnected number routes to your private line? With access to a carrier's backend, which is the kind of access a federal operation running a long-term infiltration has cultivated. You reroute a decommissioned number to a target line for a specific window, long enough for one text to go through, then you remove it. He paused. Clean, invisible. You'd never find it in the records unless you knew exactly where to look. Elena put her right hand flat against her sternum. Not a dramatic gesture. The involuntary pressure of someone managing the physical sensation of betrayal, which has a specific location in the chest, specific and locatable. She told me about the carrier switch, Elena said. She didn't make sure I updated the number. No. She knew I wouldn't. She counted on it. The warehouse, the heater, the rain on the roof, lighter now, but present. She knew Victor was going to hurt me tonight, Elena said. The sentence came out very flat. She knew the situation in that apartment, Dante said. How long has she been close to you? 8 years. 8 years. He let that sit. They had access to her for, I don't know the full timeline, but long enough to understand your situation. Long enough to know that at some point Victor would create a crisis moment. Long enough to wait for the right night and make sure that when that night came, the number you reached for in the dark didn't go where you thought it went. They used my... Elena stopped. Her jaw tightened to the point of visible tension, the muscles along the line of it going hard. They used my best friend to bait a trap with my broken arm. Dante said nothing. They knew he was going to break my arm, she said. The flatness had something underneath it now, something that was building pressure. Or something like it. They knew he was going to hurt me badly enough that I'd reach for help. They knew the number I'd reach for. And they rerouted it. Her right hand had closed into a fist against her sternum. They planned for me to be on the floor of that apartment, and they used that. Yes. To get to you. Yes. She looked at him. So what am I? She said. Her voice was very quiet. In this. What am I? Dante held her gaze. You were the mechanism, he said. Because she deserved the honest answer, and he knew she knew it already, and giving her anything less than the honest answer was a form of the same thing, using her in a smaller, gentler way. A distress signal calibrated to reach me specifically, at a moment when I would respond. Someone who understood my... He stopped for a fraction of a second. Who understood what I would do when I received a message like yours. On that number, his mother. The Brooklyn hallway. The sound he'd never unremembered. Someone had mapped that, had found the load-bearing wall in the architecture of him, and had aimed at it with precision. Mia knew, Elena said. She knew about your mother. The words hit him in a way he didn't show on his face. I told her, Elena said, years ago. She asked me once about the men I was drawn to. Why the same type? I talked about my father, and somewhere in that conversation I mentioned, she pressed her lips together. She had dinner with Victor twice. She hated him. She asked me what kind of man could make me feel safe after someone like Victor. She stopped. I described a hypothetical. Someone who would walk through a door for a woman on the floor. Someone whose damage ran in the direction of protection rather than destruction. She looked at the concrete. I didn't know I was describing a real person. But Mia passed that profile to someone, Dante said, and someone found the man who fit it. Elena looked up and put me in the right apartment with the right number and waited. The door of the warehouse opened and Luca came back in, reading the room in 1 second the way Luca read rooms, the specific quality of the silence between Dante and Elena registering as significant. He looked at Dante's face. What happened? He said. Dante told him in under 2 minutes. Luca sat on the table and listened, and his expression went through 3 stages. Disbelief, calculation, the particular grim stillness of a man revising a threat assessment upward. The friend, he said. Asset, Dante said. Witting or unwitting, I don't know yet. Could be she was recruited knowingly. Could be she was cultivated without understanding the full picture, fed lines about Hale, encouraged to maintain the friendship, prompted to mention the carrier switch at the right time. He paused. Either way, she was a mechanism. Elena had sat back down in the folding chair. She was sitting with her right elbow on her knee and her forehead resting on her right hand, looking at the floor, very still. "Elena," Dante said. She lifted her head. "I need you in this," he said. "Right now. What you're feeling, keep it. Use it later. Right now I need your head." She looked at him for a moment. Then she sat up straight. "The safe," she said. "We still need the records." "Yes. And we need them before Pellegrino talks." "Yes." "Then we go." She stood. The movement pulled at her arm, and she absorbed it and stood straight anyway. 30 minutes, you said. We're burning it." Luca looked at Dante. Dante looked at Elena. "Let's go," he said. The Suburban moved south and west back toward Riverside Tower, and the night was past 2 a.m., and the streets were the emptied streets of a city that had decided to stop pretending to be awake. Rain reduced to mist, traffic lights cycling through their patient sequences for nobody. The city in its between-hours state, not asleep, not awake, suspended. Dante sat forward in his seat with both forearms on his knees and ran the approach in his head. Luca had the camera coverage mapped. One unit on the southeast corner, stationary since they'd last confirmed it, assuming it hadn't moved. The maintenance elevator requiring the access card Elena had in her pocket. The parking sublevel to the residential corridor bypass. 32nd floor in under 4 minutes if the elevator was empty. Safe behind the Basquiat print. Combination. Out before 6 minutes elapsed. The variables he couldn't control. Whether Thomas Reed had escalated in the last hour. Whether the stationary unit had been supplemented. Whether Victor had somehow communicated the safe's contents to someone who'd acted on it. He controlled what he could. The rest he would navigate when he reached it. Elena sat beside him, not talking. He could feel her working through something. The particular quality of sustained internal motion. The processing of a betrayal large enough to require active metabolization. She'd said use it later. She was using it now, converting it into something fuel-shaped, the way people who survive hard things have learned to convert pain. He respected that. "When we're in the apartment," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "tell me one thing." She looked at him. "The 2 combinations, give me both before we go in. Not inside. Here." She understood without explanation. If something happened inside that separated them, he needed to be able to finish the job. She recited both combinations. He memorized them, slotted them into the place in his head where numbers stayed without effort. Then he looked at the road. "Dante," she said. He looked at her. "After this is done." She said it with the care of someone who has thought about how to phrase something and still isn't sure the phrasing is right. "After the records, after Pellegrino, after all of it, what happens? To you? To both of us?" He looked at her for a moment. "We get through the next 3 hours," he said. "Then we find out." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. For the second or third time tonight, that single word carrying more freight than it seemed designed to carry. The Suburban stopped 2 blocks north of Riverside Tower. They went on foot from there. Dante and Elena, Luca covering from the street, Marco positioned at the block's far end for extraction. 2-person team in, the minimum footprint. Every additional body was an additional variable, and the variance budget for the next 6 minutes was 0. The mist settled on Dante's jacket, on Elena's hair. She'd tied it back with a band she'd found in the pharmacy bag, the practical gesture of someone preparing for physical work. She had the access card in her right hand, and she walked at his pace through the wet dark without being asked to, reading his adjustments and matching them. The intuitive physical communication of 2 people who have calibrated to each other quickly. They reached the south side of the building. Elena swiped the access card at the maintenance entrance. The reader blinked green. The door opened. They moved through the parking sublevel with the quiet of intention. Not running, not slow, the specific pace of people who belong where they are and are simply moving through it. Security camera at the sublevel entrance. Luca had confirmed it. Building system camera. And the access card's entry had registered their presence to building security as an authorized resident entry. Normal. Routine. The maintenance elevator was an older system. Freight width. No mirror. No music. It smelled of cleaning supplies and metal. Elena pressed 32 and the doors closed, and the elevator began its climb. And in the enclosed space, Dante could hear her breathing. Measured, deliberate. The controlled breathing of someone managing pain and adrenaline in the same breath. "How's the arm?" he said. "Functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." "It's what I've got." She looked at the elevator doors. "Ask me again in an hour." 32nd floor. The doors opened onto the residential corridor, the same carpeted hallway, the same recessed lighting. To the left, the main elevator bank. To the right, apartment 12C. Dante looked at both directions. Clear. They moved right. The apartment door was still broken. The hinges had been ripped when Marco put his shoulder through it, and the door sat partially open, leaning into the frame at an angle, the lock no longer relevant. The hallway outside showed no fresh activity, no tape, no police presence, no indication that anyone had been here in the hours since they'd left. Dante pushed the door open with one hand and they went in. The apartment was dark and wrecked in the specific way of a place where violence had occurred and then been abandoned. Glass still on the floor from the dining table, Victor's whiskey glass on the kitchen counter, half empty. The particular stillness of interrupted life, the ghost of the evening still present in the arrangement of broken things. Elena moved without hesitation. She went through the living room into the corridor and left into the master bedroom, and Dante was a half step behind her. She knew the layout the way she'd said. In the dark, by memory, her feet finding the path without needing to see it. She went to the far wall where a large canvas hung, abstract, black and gold on white, and reached up with her right hand and lifted it off the hook. Behind it, flush with the wall, a keypad safe. She input the first combination from memory, her fingers moving quickly across the pad. The safe did not open. She tried the second combination. The safe opened. Inside, 3 inches of folded documents in a manila envelope, a small external hard drive, a passport that wasn't Victor's name, and $20,000 in banded hundreds that Dante did not touch. He took the envelope and the hard drive. Elena had already turned back toward the door. They had been in the apartment for 90 seconds. Dante was 2 steps from the bedroom door when he heard it. From the living room, from the direction of the broken front door, a sound that was not the building's ambient noise and was not the mist on the window. A footstep. He put his hand on Elena's shoulder and stopped her, and they both stood very still in the bedroom doorway and listened. Another footstep, then the specific sound of someone who had come in through the broken door and was trying not to be heard and was almost succeeding, which meant someone with training, someone who knew how to move through a space. The footstep interval told him one person, moving slowly, coming through the living room. Dante had 3 seconds of options. The bedroom had a window, 32 floors, irrelevant. One door, the one they were standing in. No other exit. He put the envelope and hard drive inside his jacket. He positioned himself against the bedroom wall beside the door frame, on the hinge side. He looked at Elena and made a single small gesture. "Stay back. Stay behind me." And she read it and moved back toward the window wall without sound. The footsteps reached the corridor. Stopped. Whoever it was knew they were there. The building entry log would have shown a recent access. The apartment was compromised and they'd entered anyway, which meant either confidence or desperation, and both of those were dangerous in different ways. A voice came through the darkness of the corridor. "Elena, male. Young, maybe, or middle-aged and tightly wound. Hard to gauge through a single word. Familiar in its address, using her first name without announcement, without the "are you in there" formality of someone genuinely searching." Elena had gone rigid. She knew that voice. Dante looked at her face in the dark, and what he saw there told him the voice was not federal, not Pellegrino, not any of the categories he'd been navigating. She pressed her lips together. "It's Victor," she whispered. Victor Hale had come back, not running after all, or running here first, which meant the go bag, the disappearance, the 10 minutes after the convoy left. That had been a calculation, not a flight. Victor had gone out, regrouped, and come back to the apartment for the thing he hadn't taken the first time. The safe. He was 3 feet from the bedroom door frame when Dante stepped out of the wall and hit him. Victor had a flashlight in his left hand and a phone in his right, and he'd come through the corridor in the half-crouched posture of a man trying to be invisible, and he had approximately 1/4 of a second to process the shape coming out of the dark before Dante's right hand connected with his jaw and the flashlight hit the corridor floor and the phone skittered into the wall. Victor went down hard and fast the way someone goes down when they're hit by someone who knows where to hit. He didn't go all the way out. He hit the corridor floor on his hands and knees, and his head was ringing and his jaw was broken, or close to it, and he looked up through streaming eyes at the man standing over him and made the connection with a delay of several seconds. "You," Victor said. His voice was broken glass. "Get up," Dante said. Victor was already trying to reach for something, a credibility, an argument, the same social reflex that had failed him before and would fail him again. "I came for my things. That's my apartment. You broke my—" "Get up," Dante said. Victor got up. He used the wall. He was not entirely stable, his jaw bleeding freely onto the expensive collar of the shirt he'd changed into since they'd last seen each other. The white shirt, now a different shirt, but the same class of expensive white shirt, because some people's costumes are load-bearing. He saw Elena in the doorway. Something moved in his face. "Elena," he said. The same voice the other man had used, but in Victor's mouth it had a different texture, something that presented as softness and had iron underneath it, the specific tone of someone who has decided to try the gentle approach first because the direct approach had already failed twice tonight. "Don't," Elena said. One word. The same flat quality Dante had heard before, the flatness that comes after you've run out of the emotional register that would make softness possible. "I just need the safe," Victor said, his eyes moving between them. Calculating. He was genuinely frightened and genuinely calculating at the same time, which was the most dangerous version of Victor Hale. "Whatever he told you, whatever's happening, Elena, this is bigger than you understand. Those documents are not in the safe," Dante said. Victor's eyes snapped to him. "I already have them," Dante said. The calculation in Victor's face shifted, recalibrated. Dante watched it happen in real time, the options narrowing, the math changing, the specific expression of a man whose last play has just been taken off the table. "You don't know what those are," Victor said. "Financial transaction records," Dante said. "Physical copies of the paper trail that connects your shell, accounts to the organizations you serviced. The documentation that a federal investigation currently lacks, and without which their case has a structural gap." He paused. "I know exactly what they are." Victor looked at Elena. "You told him about the safe," he said. His voice had changed again, something colder coming through. "You told him the combination." "Victor," Elena started, "after everything." Something was happening in Victor's face, the fear and the calculation giving way underneath to something older and less controlled, the thing that had been in his face in the kitchen at 11:47 p.m. when Elena was on the floor. "After everything I kept you from, everything I protected you from. They would have used you, Elena. Do you understand that? They've been in this city building a case and you were in that apartment and I kept you clear of all of it because if they connected you, you broke my arm," she said. The sentence shut his mouth. Completely. Like a switch. "You broke my arm," she said again. Not louder, not with more force, just the same flat, inescapable statement of a fact. "Tonight, at 11:47, you broke my arm and told me I made you do it and left me on the floor." She looked at him with an expression that Dante had not seen on her before. Not the pain, not the exhaustion, not the careful assessment. This was beyond all of those. This was a woman who had arrived at a place she'd been approaching for a long time. "Everything after that is because you broke my arm. That's the only thing that's true tonight." Victor's face was very still. Then, without warning, he moved. Not at Dante, at Elena. It was the move of a man who had decided that the woman was the leverage, that whatever else was happening, Elena Mercer was the variable he could control, the asset he could grab, the card he could still play. His hand went for her right arm, her unbroken arm, reaching to pull her in front of him, the reflexive mechanics of a man who had spent years treating her body as something he could direct. He got his hand on her wrist. Dante broke his reach in one motion, a single redirecting force applied at Victor's elbow, the geometry of it clean and intentional, and Victor's arm turned in the direction arms don't turn, and Victor's hand left Elena's wrist, and Victor made a sound that was part rage and part something raw. Dante put him against the wall. Not gently. The corridor wall, Victor's back against it, Dante's forearm across his chest, close enough that the breath between them was measurable in inches. Victor was slightly taller, and it didn't matter at all. "The last time," Dante said quietly. He said nothing after that. Just let the sentence be what it was. Let Victor look at his face from a distance of 8 inches and understand what the last time meant in practical terms. Victor understood. The resistance drained out of him, not courage. It was never courage. Victor Hale's energy came from feeling larger than what he was facing and standing 8 inches from Dante Salvatore with a broken jaw and an inventory of everything that had gone wrong tonight. He had no remaining fuel for the feeling. His body went slack against the wall. Dante stepped back. "The documents," Victor said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "If you have those documents, you have everything. Every transaction I ran for every organization, including yours. You know what that means. You know what they'll do with that." "I know what I'll do with it," Dante said. Victor looked at him. A last calculation. The eyes of a man sorting through reduced options. "There's a federal agent," Victor said. "His name is—" Dante's phone buzzed. Not the private phone. The regular phone, in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out. "Luca, on the outside line." He answered. "Pellegrino," Luca said. His voice was tight in a way Luca's voice almost never was. "He made contact 20 minutes ago. Not with Federal. With Marchetti." Dante went still. Paul Marchetti. Not Federal, not a competing organization in the traditional sense. Something older and more specific. A man who operated in the particular negative space where several of Philadelphia's major operations intersected, who had survived 15 years by owning information rather than territory, and selling that information to whoever currently needed it most. Marchetti had the city's pressure points mapped. If Anthony Pellegrino had gone to Marchetti with information about Dante Salvatore's current situation, the federal infiltration, the missing records, the woman, Marchetti would auction it. Tonight. "He sent a location," Luca said. "Marchetti wants a meeting. All parties. He says he has something everyone wants and he's willing to broker." A pause. "He mentioned the records by name, Dante. He knows we have them." "Thomas," Dante said. "Has to be." Thomas knew about the safe. He'd been in the apartment twice with Victor on business. He knew about the physical records. Dante looked at the documents inside his jacket. Across from him, Victor had heard the word Marchetti and gone a different kind of pale. "Marchetti's location," Dante said. "The Callahan Yards, 40 minutes north." Luca paused. "He gave a 2-hour window. If you don't come, he sells to Federal directly." Dante looked at Elena. She had heard enough. "When?" Dante said. "Window opens in 45 minutes, Luca said. "Get the car," Dante said. "And Luca, what's Marchetti's reputation with leverage situations?" A brief pause. "He burns sources sometimes," Luca said carefully, "when the math changes. And if we go in there and the math changes." The pause was longer this time. "Then we're the source," Luca said. Dante ended the call. Victor was looking at him with something that might have been the first genuine piece of information Victor Hale had offered all night. "Don't go to Marchetti," Victor said. "Why?" "Because Marchetti doesn't broker," Victor said. "He positions. You go to that meeting, you're not negotiating. You're being shown a room you can't leave." His voice had the quality of someone finally telling the truth because the lies have run out. "I know what Marchetti does in leverage situations. I've seen it." His jaw was bleeding steadily, the words coming out thick. "He sets the table and everyone sits down and then the table disappears." "You've done business with him," Dante said. "Once," Victor said. "I know what once costs." Dante looked at him. "If you go to Marchetti with those records," Victor said, "he takes the records and he takes you and he sells everything to whoever gives him the most. Federal, Pellegrino, anyone." He paused. "Including whoever he's already working for." "Who is he working for?" Dante said. Victor pressed his lips together. His eyes moved to Elena once and then back to Dante. "The same person who's been running this from the beginning," Victor said. "The person who set up the case, who cultivated the assets, who mapped your exposure and built the trap." He paused. "The person you've been treating as a peripheral player." Dante looked at him. "Marchetti isn't brokering," Victor said. "Marchetti is the collection point. You walk in there with those records, you're delivering them directly to the person who's been trying to get them for 14 months. "Thomas," Dante said. "Thomas is a tool," Victor said. "Tools have handlers." "Who?" Dante said. Victor looked at Elena one more time. There was something in his face when he looked at her. something Dante cataloged with the specific alertness of a man who notices what other men look at and when and why. The realization came at him sideways, not from what Victor said, from how he looked at Elena when he didn't say it. Dante turned. Elena was standing in the doorway with her right hand hanging at her side and her sling and her access card, and the particular expression of someone who has been following a conversation with intense attention. "Elena," Dante said. She looked at him, and in the space between his saying her name and whatever came next, in the corridor of the 32nd floor of Riverside Tower at 2:41 in the morning, with Victor bleeding against the wall and the documents inside Dante's jacket and the 2-hour window ticking toward its first hour gone, something shifted in the quality of the air between them. A look, not guilt. Guilt was too simple, and guilt was something you could read and categorize and respond to. This was more complex, the expression of someone holding two things at once that can't both be true, and who has been holding them for long enough that the holding itself has become the defining condition. Victor said nothing. He didn't have to. Dante looked at Elena's face, and he asked the question the same way he'd asked the first one, quietly, with the flat precision of someone who already knows the architecture of the answer and is asking only for the geometry of it. "How long," he said, "have you known my private number?" The corridor was very still. Elena's right hand moved slightly at her side, not reaching for anything, not a defensive gesture, just the involuntary motion of a body responding to a moment of exposure. "Before tonight," he said. She looked at him, and the look on her face was the most complicated thing he'd seen all evening, in a night that had been full of complicated things, because it wasn't the look of someone who'd been caught. It was the look of someone who had known this moment was coming and had been dreading it, not because of what it would cost her, but because of what it would cost him. "Yes," she said. The word was barely a sound. "Before tonight," he said again. "Yes," she said. Victor made a sound from the wall that was something between a laugh and a sob and contained none of the attributes of either. Dante stood in the corridor with the documents against his chest and the 2-hour window burning down, and the woman he'd carried out of the rain looking at him with that expression, and the question he'd asked himself in the parking structure, "What is she?" in this, presented itself again with a completely different set of possible answers. He breathed once, slow, controlled. "Tell me everything," he said. His voice was very quiet. "From the beginning," he said. "All of it," he said. Elena looked at him, and her jaw was set, and her eyes were holding his without flinching, and there was something in them that he could not yet parse, whether it was the last layer of a deception or the first moment of a truth she'd been carrying too long to carry any further. "I will," she said. "But not here," she said, "and not with him listening," she said. Outside the broken door of apartment 12C, somewhere in the wet Philadelphia night, a clock was running. 43 minutes to the Callahan Yards window. 14 months of damage inside his jacket. And the woman standing in front of him was either the mechanism of his destruction or the only person who understood its full architecture well enough to... He gave her 4 minutes. That was what the clock allowed. He walked Victor back into the living room and sat him in the chair nearest the broken door with Marco's number dialed on the regular phone and told him that if he moved before Marco arrived, the conversation they'd been having would conclude in a way Victor would not enjoy. Victor sat. His jaw had stopped bleeding the way broken things sometimes stop. Not healed, just exhausted. He looked small in the chair. All the expensive upholstery and imported marble around him, and he looked like something that had been left behind when the real version of the room moved out. Dante went back to the corridor. Elena was standing where he'd left her. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the corridor was quiet, and the mist pressed against the window at the far end, and he said, 4 minutes, start. She started. "I was recruited 14 months ago," she said. "Not by Federal. By a woman named Carol Rice, who works for a private intelligence contractor that does work for federal agencies on a contract basis. She came to me through Mia. I thought Mia arranged an introduction to a nonprofit consulting position." A pause. "It wasn't a nonprofit." Dante listened. "They told me Victor Hale was a target, that he was laundering money for dangerous people, and that there was a federal case being assembled against him and against the network he serviced. They said they needed someone on the inside. Someone who could maintain proximity without raising suspicion. She looked at him steadily. Someone who was already in Victor's orbit. You weren't already in his orbit, Dante said. You met him 2 months before you moved in. Yes, she said. Carol Rice introduced us. At a gallery opening in Old City. She told me he'd be there. She told me what he responded to. A beat. I wore the right dress. I said the right things. Victor asked for my number. She paused. I reported back to Carol within the hour. 4 minutes. He let her go. For the first 6 months, it was surveillance. What he said on the phone, who came to the apartment, financial patterns I could observe without accessing anything directly. I sent weekly reports through an encrypted app on a secondary phone I kept in a gym bag at a locker on Market Street. She exhaled. Then Carol told me they needed the physical records, that Victor kept paper documentation in the apartment, that I needed to find the safe. You found it. 4 months in. I never told them the combination because I never had the combination until 3 months ago. Victor changed it in front of me by accident. He'd had too much to drink and he thought I was asleep. The familiar grim expression. He consistently underestimated me. So did Carol Rice, Dante said. Elena held his gaze. Carol gave me your private number 8 weeks ago. She said I should memorize it, store it under me as contact, and that I would know when to use it. She paused. She told me you were the key to breaking open the larger network, that you were the significant target, that Victor alone wasn't enough. She told you what I'd do, Dante said, when I got the message. She said you'd come. Elena's voice didn't waver, but something in it had a quality of weight, of a sentence being carried a long distance. She said she had a psychological profile. She described a specific vulnerability, something from your past that would make a distress message of that particular type impossible for you to ignore. My mother, he said. She didn't say specifically. She said you had a wound that ran in a particular direction and that the message needed to come from that direction. Elena looked at the corridor floor for a moment. She said you'd carry her out of the building. She predicted that specifically. She looked up. I thought she was being dramatic. He stood in the corridor and absorbed this in the way he absorbed most things, with the flat, controlled surface that processed impact internally and showed nothing on the outside, the machinery of him working underneath the stillness. You knew who I was, he said, before tonight. I knew your name, your general profile, the size of your operation. She paused. I didn't know you. That's a distinction, he said. Is it a meaningful one? She looked at him. I've been in that apartment for 14 months, she said. For the last 8, I had stopped caring about the case, about Carol's operation, about any of it. Her voice stayed even. Victor was what he was, and I'd chosen to stay inside something that was hurting me because I thought the objective justified it, and then the objective stopped justifying it, and I was just inside something that was hurting me. She paused. Tonight wasn't a mission. When I reached for that phone with 2% battery and a broken arm, I wasn't running an operation. I was trying not to die. Dante said nothing. The number being there, she said, memorized under Mia's name. That was muscle memory. That was 8 weeks of Carol telling me, when the moment comes, use the number. I didn't think tonight was that moment. I was just reaching for my best friend in the dark. 4 minutes had come and gone. He knew it. He stood in the corridor and held the weight of everything she'd said and tested it against what he knew and what he felt, and what he was capable of believing on a night that had already required him to revise his understanding of reality several times. The thing was, and he knew this about himself, had always known it, he was not a man who was easy to deceive for long. 14 months of deception is a different matter, but a woman in an apartment with a broken arm reaching for a phone with 2% battery at 11:53 p.m. That moment he knew. He'd known it in the car, in the elevator, in Marcus Webb's corridor, in every subsequent hour of the night. The truth of that moment did not bend under examination. Carol Rice had built a machine and aimed it at him. The machine had a human being inside it. And somewhere between the gallery opening 14 months ago and the corridor floor of the 32nd floor, the human being and the machine had become two different things. He didn't know what that meant for everything that followed tonight. He knew what it meant for the next 38 minutes. The Callahan Yards meeting, he said. Carol Rice will be there. Almost certainly, Elena said. Marchetti is how she collects. She doesn't appear directly. But she'll be close. Yes. And if I walk into that meeting with the records and no leverage, he said, she takes them and the case collapses inward on everyone in it. He looked at the documents inside his jacket. Including you. Elena said nothing. You're not a protected asset if this unravels the wrong way, he said. You were an operative who went off mission. That's a liability, not an asset. I know, she said. So we need leverage that isn't the records alone, he said. She looked at him. Carol Rice, she said slowly, has been running an unauthorized private intelligence operation on American soil, targeting American citizens, in coordination with but not officially sanctioned by the federal agencies she contracts for. She paused. I know this because she told me. She liked to explain the scope of what she was doing. She was proud of it. A beat. An operation of that scope, running without official sanction, is not just a legal problem. It's a career-ending, institution-destroying problem for everyone whose name appears in her communication chain. You documented it, Dante said. The secondary phone, she said, in the gym bag at the Market Street locker. 14 months of encrypted reports, communication logs, Carol's directives, Thomas Reed's planted access procedures, the full operational record. Dante looked at her. You kept copies, he said. Carol taught me to document everything, Elena said. She didn't specify that the documentation should only benefit her. In another context, this might have been the moment for something. Acknowledgement, the recalibration of a relationship that had started in the most complicated circumstances imaginable and was now revealing additional layers of complexity at a rate that exceeded normal processing. But the window was 35 minutes, and the Callahan yards were 40 minutes north, and the only currency that mattered in the next hour was the kind you could put on a table in a room and say, here, this is what it costs. The locker key, he said. She reached into the pocket of her slacks, produced a small key on a plain ring. She held it out. He took it. Their fingers didn't touch. Almost. Let's go, he said. Marco arrived for Victor as they were leaving. Dante gave him 3 sentences of instruction in the stairwell, and Marco's expression communicated that 3 sentences was sufficient, and the rest would be handled with the competence that had made Marco worth keeping for 7 years. Victor would be moved and held and dealt with through Dante's attorney in the morning. Not harmed, just removed from the active equation until the equation resolved. The Suburban was at the south entrance. Luca in the front with the expression of a man who had spent the last 20 minutes processing new information and had arrived at the far edge of it intact but changed. He looked at Elena when she got in. She looked back at him. I know, she said. You have questions. Later, Luca said. He said it the way Dante would have said it. The appropriate prioritization of now over later. They moved north. The city opened up as they left the center density. The architecture changing from the glass and steel of new money to the older industrial bones of the northern neighborhoods. The streets wider and less maintained, the buildings lower and further apart. The Philadelphia that predated the revitalization existing alongside it in the specific tension of a city that hasn't decided which version of itself to become. Callahan Yards was a decommissioned rail facility, 12 acres of overgrown tracks, abandoned switching houses, 3 large maintenance buildings that had been empty long enough to accumulate the particular atmosphere of places that hold things in suspension. The smell of old metal and standing water. The quiet of a space where noise has stopped, but its absence is still shaped by it. Luca had run it through the network in the car. Marchetti had used it before, twice in the past 3 years for broker meetings of the kind that required neutral ground and exits in multiple directions. The configuration of the main building favored someone who knew the layout over someone coming in fresh. They stopped a quarter-mile short, and Dante got out and looked at the building for 60 seconds. One light visible through a high window. Single vehicle parked at the northeast corner. Dark. No plates visible at this distance. The rail yard fence was old chain link with gaps that weren't accidents. Marchetti's people would have prepared the entry points. How many does he typically bring? Dante asked Luca. 3. 4 maximum. Luca was beside him looking at the same window. He doesn't like crowds. Crowds complicate the accounting. Elena, Dante said without turning. She was beside him. She'd been beside him since the building, close enough that he was aware of her warmth in the cold air. Her arm in its sling, her jaw set, her eyes on the building. The operational record on the secondary phone, he said. You said encrypted. A ES-256. The decryption key is 12 characters. I'm the only one who has it. Does Carol know the encryption spec? She specified it. She doesn't know my decryption key. She assumed the phone would only ever be accessed to transmit reports to her channel, not to operate independently. A pause. Another underestimation. He looked at her profile in the dark. If we walk in there with the records and your documentation and Carol Rice is running the room, he said, we need to establish what we have before Marchetti controls the terms. He paused. That means you need to be willing to put yourself in that room. I'm already in this room, she said. I've been in the room for 14 months. This room is different. In that room, you're not an operative going off mission. You're a direct liability to Carol's operation, and she'll assess you accordingly. I know. If the math shifts, then we make sure the math doesn't shift, she said. She turned to look at him fully. I know what Carol does when the math shifts, she said. She shifted it on 3 assets before me. I know because she told me about them as cautionary tales. Her voice was even and very careful, the precision of someone who has made a decision in the hours before making it and is now simply executing. The only way out of Carol's math is to change what the variables are worth, and the only way to do that is to be in the room when she calculates. He held her gaze. Stay close, he said. I've been staying close since Riverside Tower, she said. They went in through the northeast gap in the fence, single file, Luca, then Dante, then Elena, then the 2 men behind. The rail yard was wet from the rain, the ballast stones slick, the rusted tracks interrupting the ground in irregular intervals. The maintenance building was 100 yards of open ground, and they crossed it with the unhurried pace of people who had decided that moving as if they belonged was the only viable performance. The building's side door was open. Inside, the smell of oil and old concrete and the specific cold of a large enclosed space that has been unheated for years. The single light was a work lamp on a folding table at the building's center. At the table sat Paul Marchetti. Marchetti was 63 years old and looked 50, which was the product of careful living and the particular physical economy of a man who conserved himself for the moments that required expansion. He was small and neat and gray at the temples and wore the kind of suit that announced nothing about its cost. He had a glass of water in front of him and a folder on the table and 3 men positioned in the building's shadows with the visible discipline of people who were paid to be visible. Beside Marchetti, standing rather than sitting, was a woman Dante hadn't seen before but recognized from the description Elena had given in the car on the way over. Carol Rice. 50, maybe. Fitted dark jacket, hair that had been professional once and was now slightly undone from a long night. The specific posture of someone who is accustomed to being the most organized person in any room and is currently managing the irritation of a situation that has not organized itself according to plan. Her eyes went to Elena immediately. Something passed across Carol's face when she saw Elena. Not surprise, the surprise had already been metabolized. Something harder than surprise. The expression of a chess player watching a piece move to a square it was never supposed to reach. Marchetti stood. Mr. Salvatore, he said, the voice of a man who found the proceedings genuinely interesting. I appreciate your punctuality. Paul, Dante said. He didn't look at Carol Rice yet. He sat down across from Marchetti with the deliberate economy of someone establishing that they had time, that the urgency in this room was not his urgency, that he had come as a courtesy rather than as a response to pressure. Luca stood at his right. Elena stood at his left, 1 step back. Carol was looking at Elena the way you look at something you built and then lost and are now seeing operate in someone else's hands. I understand you have documentation that several parties have an interest in, Marchetti said. He had the cadence of a man who genuinely enjoyed his work. The particular pleasure of someone for whom the table itself, the negotiation, the arrangement of competing interests into a temporary structure, was the point. I've been asked to facilitate a conversation about how that documentation is disposed of. By whom? Dante said. Marchetti smiled. Several parties. I have a specific question about one of them, Dante said. He looked at Carol Rice for the first time. Your operation. Who sanctions it? Carol looked at him. She had the specific stillness of someone who has been trained to present stillness as authority. That's not relevant to tonight, she said. It's the only thing relevant to tonight, Dante said. You've been running a domestic intelligence operation for 14 months using private operatives, rerouted telecommunications, and planted assets inside an organization that has not been charged with or convicted of any crime. You've done this under a contract that, if I had to guess, has language that doesn't explicitly authorize the methods you've used. He paused, which means the people whose names are on that contract are exposed, significantly. Carol's stillness remained intact. You're describing a hypothetical. I'm describing a 14-month operational record, Dante said. He looked at Marchetti, which is what we're actually here to discuss. He reached into his jacket and placed the manila envelope on the table. Then he looked at Elena. Elena reached into the sling with her right hand, the arm not broken, the hand she'd been using all night, and produced a phone. Small, matte black, the secondary phone from the Market Street locker that Luca had retrieved in the 20 minutes between the corridor at Riverside Tower and the Callahan Yards approach. She placed it on the table beside the envelope. Victor Hale's transaction records, Dante said. Every paper trail you've been missing, and 14 months of Carol Rice's operational communications, asset management directives, and method documentation. He looked at Carol. Including the communications regarding the rerouting of a private telephone number to mine, the psychological profile built to engineer my response, the deliberate staging of a domestic violence incident as a trigger mechanism. He paused, using a woman inside that incident as bait. The room was very quiet. Marchetti looked at the table with genuine interest. Carol Rice looked at Elena. You built a parallel record, Carol said. Her voice was very controlled, but the control had an edge to it now, a hairline fracture. From the beginning, from month 4, Elena said. When I understood that your operation didn't have a plan for what happened to me when it concluded. She held Carol's gaze. I was a mechanism. I needed to become a person with leverage. You taught me how. Something moved in Carol's face. Elena, don't, Elena said. The word came out flat and final, and Carol closed her mouth. Dante looked at Marchetti. The way I see the accounting, Dante said, is this. Victor Hale's transaction records exist. They're currently on this table. They implicate several organizations, including mine. If they enter federal evidence, multiple cases become prosecutable. He kept his voice level, the tone of someone walking through arithmetic. Carol Rice's operational record also exists. It's also on this table. If it enters any official channel, federal oversight, congressional, journalistic, the unauthorized methods documented in it become a catastrophic problem for the agencies whose contractor she is. He paused. Both documents are liabilities. Both documents are also assets. What they are depends entirely on how tonight ends. Marchetti folded his hands on the table. You're proposing an arrangement. I'm describing one, Dante said. The records go into a secured location controlled by my attorney. They don't move unless conditions are violated. In exchange, Carol's operation concludes. Thomas Reed is extracted and debriefed, and the infiltration of my organization ends. Any existing case material built on Thomas's inside access becomes unusable. Carol's team knows why. He paused. Anthony Pellegrino is allowed to make his own decisions without pressure from Carol's people, which means whatever he does on his own initiative rather than as a pushed piece on someone else's board. Marchetti looked at Carol. Carol was looking at the phone on the table. The decryption key, she said, her eyes on Elena. Without the key, the operational record is noise. Yes, Elena said. You're the only one who has it. Yes. Carol looked at her for a long moment. The expression on her face was complicated in the way of someone who designed a tool and is now watching the tool decline to be used as designed, and is experiencing both professional chagrin and something that might, in a different light, be a form of respect. If the arrangement holds, Carol said to Dante, the key stays dormant. If the arrangement holds, Dante confirmed. And the woman, Carol said, meaning Elena, is not part of any case. Not a witness, not an operative, not a liability. She is a private citizen who had no official involvement in anything. He said it the way he'd said it to Elena in the warehouse. The story and the only story. Her medical records from tonight document a domestic injury. The responding party, me, is not relevant to any investigation. That's the version that exists. Carol pressed her lips together. You're asking me to close a 14-month operation, she said, with no return. I'm asking you to close an unauthorized 14-month operation, Dante said, in exchange for the operational record staying in a drawer rather than on a Senate Oversight Committee's desk. He looked at her. That's not nothing. Marchetti made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He looked at the two items on the table and then at Dante with the expression of a man who has brokered a great many arrangements and has genuine professional appreciation for the architecture of a well-constructed one. The transaction records, Marchetti said. Your organizations are also documented. Yes, Dante said. You're accepting that as a mutual condition of the arrangement. The records exist and their existence constrains your operation as much as it constrains any case Carol could build. That's correct, Dante said. Clean hands are the cost of the arrangement for everyone. Marchetti looked at Carol. Carol looked at the table. The maintenance building around them was cold and old and indifferent, the stripped-down bones of something industrial that had outlasted its purpose and was waiting to find out what came next. Carol picked up her water glass, held it, set it down. 12 months, she said. I want the operational record destroyed in 12 months, not held. Destroyed with verified confirmation. 6 months, Dante said, with my attorney's certification. 9. 7, he said, and Thomas Reed is out of Philadelphia by the end of the week. Carol looked at Elena one more time. A long look, the look of someone cataloging a loss that is also, in some reading of events, not entirely a loss. Done, she said. The arrangement was made, not with paperwork, not with signatures, with the particular gravity of people who understood that what bound them was mutual exposure rather than legal instrument, and that mutual exposure in this context was more durable than any contract. Marchetti would serve as the neutral record keeper, the arrangement's existence documented in his files. The documentation itself a deterrent. It was the architecture of a cold peace, which is the only kind of peace that holds in certain temperatures. They left the Callahan Yards at 3:49 in the morning. The rain had stopped completely somewhere in the previous hour, leaving the city in the particular post-rain clarity of washed streets and cool air and the distant smell of the Delaware. The sky over Philadelphia was the dark gray that precedes dawn by a few degrees. Not light yet, but no longer the full black of deep night. In the Suburban, nobody spoke for the first several minutes. Luca drove. Elena sat with her head resting against the window, her right hand in her lap, her broken arm against her body. Her eyes were open, and she was looking at the passing city with the flat attentiveness of someone who has been awake through something significant and is now in the processing stage that comes after. The long metabolic work of integrating an experience that doesn't reduce to simple categories. Dante sat beside her and looked at the road through the windshield. He thought about the arrangement. The 7 months. Thomas Reed leaving Philadelphia. Carol Rice closing her operation with the particular professional grief of someone forced to abandon well-constructed work. Anthony Pellegrino, who would have made his move tonight and would wake up tomorrow to find that the piece he was trying to sell had already been traded in a room he didn't know existed, and would spend some time revising his understanding of where he stood. Victor Hale in Marco's custody, looking at his broken jaw and his empty safe and the remnants of an evening that had dismantled everything he'd built around himself like armor. He thought about the 14 months, about a gallery opening in Old City, a woman in the right dress saying the right things to the right man on instructions from a contractor he'd never heard of, 14 months of reports sent from a gym bag locker, a psychological profile built from secondhand information about a Brooklyn hallway and the specific wound it had left in an 8-year-old boy who grew up to be something complicated and didn't talk about it. He thought about the elevator at Riverside Tower, the question she'd asked. Who are you? He had said the wrong number. He had meant it as a description of the evening, the mechanism, the misdirected text, the accident of a dying battery and a wrong contact. But sitting in the Suburban at 3:51 a.m., with the city going gray outside and the particular exhaustion of a night that had run through him like a river through stone, he thought that the wrong number had a second meaning that hadn't been available to him in that elevator. He was the wrong answer to Carol Rice's equation. He was supposed to be the conclusion of a case, the destination of a trap. He was supposed to walk into a room at the Callahan Yards and put 14 months of work on the table for someone who'd engineered the entire chain of events leading there. He was supposed to be Carol's variable, behaving according to her profile of his damage. Instead, he was here, in a car, in the rain-clean dark, with the documents in his jacket and an arrangement in his pocket and a woman beside him who had been sent to destroy him and had, somewhere in 14 months of careful damage, chosen something else. "Luca," Dante said. "Yeah." "Take us to the Fairmount house, the guest room." Luca didn't answer for a second. The Fairmount house was personal, not operational, not a safe house, not in any file Thomas Reed had touched. Personal. "Okay," Luca said. Dante looked at Elena. She had turned from the window and was looking at him. "You need to sleep," he said. "The arm needs elevation, and you haven't slept, and the next 12 hours are going to require you to have a working brain." "And after the next 12 hours," she said. He looked at her. "My attorney in the morning," he said. "He'll arrange the documentation of your status. Private citizen, no case involvement. That'll take most of the day." He paused. "After that, you can do whatever you want. Go wherever you want. You're not—" He stopped. "You're not obligated to anything." She was quiet. "You saved my life," she said. "Tonight." "You saved mine," he said. "Tonight." She looked at him with that expression, the one he still didn't entirely have a name for, that lived between assessment and something warmer that both of them had been keeping at a measured distance because the distance was appropriate given the circumstances, and both of them knew it. "The psychological profile Carol built," she said. "The wound that ran in a particular direction." She said it carefully, the way you approach something that belongs to someone else and requires permission to touch. She was right about what it was. She was wrong about what it made you. He looked at her. "She thought it made you predictable," Elena said. "Someone who could be aimed." She paused. "It doesn't. It makes you—" She stopped, looking for the word. "Deliberate. You choose. Every time. You chose tonight." He was quiet for a moment. "So did you," he said. She held his gaze. The Suburban moved through the last of the city's night, under the streetlights reflecting in the rain-wet street, past the darkened windows and the early morning shapes of a city recalibrating itself for the coming day. The sky to the east was beginning its first gray suggestions of light, the particular, not quite dawn that belongs to no hour officially, but exists between the end of one thing and the beginning of another. At the Fairmount house, Luca held the door. Elena got out first. She stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the brownstone and then looked at the sky, which was the color of pewter with the first thin line of something brighter at the horizon. She stood there for a moment with her broken arm and her borrowed coat and her 14 months and her 7 combinations and her gym bag full of evidence and her one intact hand at her side. Dante stood beside her. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. They stood in the cleared air after the rain and looked at the beginning of the sky and existed, for a moment, simply as two people who had come through something hard and were on the other side of it and had not entirely collapsed. Then Elena exhaled, long, slow, the full decompression of a chest that had been held tight for a very long time. She turned toward the door. Dante followed. Inside, the house was warm. Luca had been here before and knew where things were. Lights on in the kitchen, water running somewhere, the sounds of a space adjusting to occupation. Dante showed Elena the guest room on the second floor, the narrow hallway, the door that locked from the inside. She stood in the doorway. "The arm," he said. "Elevation. There are extra pillows in the closet." She looked at him. There was something she wanted to say. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the particular expression of someone who has carried a sentence for long enough that putting it down is a physical relief. But she held it for another moment. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "When you read the note in Thomas's contact file," she said, "the timestamp, and you turn to look at me," she paused. "In the time between that and asking me how well I knew Mia, What did you think? He considered the question. I thought, he said, that either you were part of the machine that had been running at me for 14 months, in which case I was in a significant problem, or you were someone who'd been put inside that machine without fully understanding what it was and had found a way to run it from the inside. He paused. I wasn't sure which. And now, she said. Now I know it was both, he said, and that the second one became more true over time than the first. She looked at him for a long moment. Is that enough? She said. For you to... She stopped. Restarted. I was sent to you. That's a fact that doesn't change regardless of what changed afterward. You were sent to Victor, he said. I was the wrong number. A beat. Then something happened in her face that was not quite a smile but was related to one in the way that surviving something is related to having wanted to survive it. The recognition of a distance covered, a cost paid, an arrival at the other side of something that was not guaranteed. She looked down. Get some sleep, he said. He turned and walked back down the hallway. He heard her door close. He stood at the end of the hallway for a moment and listened to the house settle around him. Luca in the kitchen, the sound of a cabinet closing, the ordinary sounds of a place that was lived in and therefore real. He went downstairs. Luca had coffee on. He'd found it somewhere in the kitchen, ground, proper, not the convenience kind. And the smell of it was the smell of 5 in the morning and a long night on the other side, and the specific possibility of whatever came after. Dante sat at the kitchen table. Luca put a cup in front of him and sat down across from him, and they sat for a moment without speaking, which was the right thing to do. Cleanup will take a week, Luca said eventually. I know. Thomas Reed is still out there. He'll surface. He's a filed asset who's lost his cover. He'll be reabsorbed somewhere. He won't come back here. Pellegrino. We'll recalibrate, Dante said. Anthony's primary skill is surviving. He'll find the new weather and adjust. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Give him a week, then a meeting, controlled, neutral. Let him make his peace. Luca nodded. The woman, Luca said, not asked with suspicion. With the careful neutrality of a man who has known Dante Salvatore for 11 years and is choosing his words accordingly. Elena, Dante said. Elena, Luca agreed. Dante looked at the coffee. She's under the arrangement, he said. Protected. Her status is clean. And beyond the arrangement, Luca said. Dante didn't answer immediately. He thought about the corridor at Riverside Tower, the elevator, the Kensington warehouse, the corridor outside 12C at 2:41 in the morning. He thought about 4 minutes and everything she'd put into them. He thought about a woman who had been sent to destroy him and had instead spent 14 months in something that nearly destroyed her, and had come out of it with an encrypted phone and 2 combination sequences and the particular endurance of someone who had learned to plan their own escape because nobody else was going to plan it. I don't know yet, he said. Luca accepted this. They drank their coffee. Outside, the sky continued its slow work of becoming morning, the pewter gray giving way to something warmer at the edges, the first real suggestion of light spreading along the Philadelphia horizon, falling on the Schuylkill and the old brick and the glass towers and the neighborhoods that predated all of it, the whole complicated layered city going on about its business of becoming the next day, regardless of what the previous one had cost. Dante set his cup down. He thought about what it meant to be the wrong number, about the mechanics of a trap that worked because it was built on something real, a real wound, a real response, a real 8-year-old boy in a hallway who had never stopped listening for the particular sound of someone asking for help in the dark. Carol Rice had aimed at that. She had found the load-bearing wall and hit it with precision, and the wall had held, not because it was impenetrable, because what it was load-bearing for, the thing it supported, the structure it kept upright, was the thing Carol Rice had not included in her profile. She'd mapped the damage. She hadn't mapped what the damage had built. Luca washed his cup in the sink and said he'd be back in 2 hours and went out. The house was quiet. Dante stayed at the kitchen table as the light came in through the window, the thin early light of a November morning in Philadelphia falling on the wood grain and the coffee cup and his hands resting flat on the table. He looked at his hands for a moment, the right one, the knuckles still faintly marked from the evening, And then he looked at the window and the light. Upstairs, somewhere behind a door that locked from the inside, Elena Mercer slept with her broken arm elevated on borrowed pillows. She was not the person he'd thought she was when he carried her out of the rain. She was more complicated than that. More compromised, more intentional, more surviving. She'd been sent into a situation designed to break her, by Victor in one direction, by Carol in another. And she had come out of it with her eyes open and her secondary phone encrypted and the specific hardness of someone who has learned that the only leverage you truly own is the kind you build for yourself in the dark when nobody knows you're building it. He wasn't sure what came after this. The morning, the attorney, the week of cleanup, the longer work of repairing what 14 months had exposed. He wasn't sure what the thing between them was, or what it would become, or whether it could survive the weight of its own origin story. The trap, the wrong number, the staging of an evening designed to use both of them. He wasn't sure, but he was, for the first time in a long night that had required him to be very sure about a great many things, not in a hurry to decide. He picked up his coffee cup. He drank what was left of it. Outside, the city went on. The wrong number. The wrong answer to the right equation. The mistake that turns out to be the only honest thing in a room full of arrangements. He set the cup down and looked at the November light coming through the window and sat with the particular quiet of a man who has survived something and knows it and does not yet know what surviving it means, only that he is on the other side of it, and the side he is on is the morning, and the morning is enough. For now. The morning was enough.